It was a Sunday, like so many others, when the marsh first whispered its secret to me. I was 28 then, not a kid fresh out of college, but seasoned enough to think I knew a thing or two about the world, especially the quiet corners of it. My job as a land surveyor often took me deep into the kinds of places most people only glimpse from a car window, the forgotten stretches, the wilder bits where the earth still felt untamed. This particular contract had me out near Blackwood Marsh, a place notorious for its biting insects and its even more biting solitude. My home base was a good hour's drive away, a small house with a yard I barely maintained, but it was mine. I valued my independence, and the long hours I put in meant I could afford it. Usually I had a junior assistant with me, some wide-eyed kid looking to gain experience, but this project was small, precise, and frankly, too tedious to warrant a second person. Solo run, I'd told my boss, liking the sound of it, the freedom of being completely self-reliant. It was a choice I'd come to regret. Blackwood Marsh wasn't just remote, it was isolated. Miles of winding dirt roads led to a small, rutted track that dead-ended at the edge of what felt like a prehistoric landscape. Thick reeds swayed taller than my truck, obscuring views, and the air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. I'd set up my temporary camp, a robust, all-weather tent and a small fire pit, on a patch of higher ground overlooking the main expanse of the marsh. My instruments were state-of-the-art, but even the best tech couldn't make the surveying work less monotonous. Weekdays were a blur of sighting lines, marking coordinates, and battling the omnipresent hum of mosquitoes. Sundays, however, were my time. I usually packed a book, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and just listened. Listened to the wind rustling through the reeds, the distant cry of a hawk, the splash of something unseen in the murky water. It was a kind of peace you couldn't find in the city, a chance to recharge before another week of tedious precision. This particular Sunday had started like any other. The morning mist burned off slowly, revealing a sky of almost painful blue. I'd finished my coffee, opened my worn copy of an old adventure novel, and settled back in my folding chair. The world was quiet, save for the natural symphony of the marsh. Then it happened. A sound so out of place, so unexpected, that it snagged my attention like a burr on wool. It was faint, barely there, carried on a breeze that had just shifted. A distant, rhythmic clanging. At first, I dismissed it. Maybe a farmer's bell, but there were no farms for miles, not in this direction. A buoy bell, perhaps? No, the marsh was too shallow, too choked with vegetation for any navigable waterway that would warrant such a thing. And the sound wasn't metallic in a harsh, industrial way. It was deeper, richer, with an unmistakable resonance. It sounded like a bell. A church bell. And it was coming from deep within the marsh itself. The clanging came again, a little stronger this time, carrying a faint metallic echo that seemed to ripple through the heavy marsh air. It wasn't the tinny, rapid clang of a cowbell, nor the sharp, urgent peal of a fire alarm. This was deep, sonorous, almost mournful, with a slow, deliberate rhythm that bespoke immense weight and purpose. Dong, dong, dong. It was unmistakably a bell, and just as unmistakably, it was a sound that had no business being here. My mind, accustomed to cataloging and verifying, immediately started running through possibilities, discarding each one as quickly as it formed. There was no village, no forgotten homestead with an old bell tower, no boat launch or navigable river anywhere near this sector of Blackwood Marsh. I knew the topographical maps of this area by heart. I'd been over every contour, every elevation change. It was a wilderness, a boggy expanse of reeds, stunted cypress, and murky water. Nothing human, save for my own temporary camp, existed for miles around. I closed my book, the adventure of a fictional hero suddenly paling in comparison to the real-life mystery unfolding before me. My coffee, once a comforting ritual, now felt like a distraction. Leaning forward in my chair, I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the direction. The wind, which had brought the sound to me, had shifted again, dying down to an almost imperceptible breath. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the drone of a dragonfly. Then it returned, even fainter, but still there. Dong, dong, dong. It seemed to emanate from deeper within the marsh, perhaps a mile or two in, judging by the attenuated sound. My surveyor's brain, trained to estimate distances and directions with precision, tried to lock onto it. South-southwest, I thought, a direction where the marsh grew particularly dense, where the water table was higher, and the ground was even more treacherous. A prickle of unease started to crawl up my spine. It wasn't fear, not yet. More like the unsettling feeling of a perfectly ordered calculation suddenly producing an irrational number. This simply shouldn't be. Curiosity, that dangerous impulse that drives us into the unknown, began to override my usual caution. I stood up, stretching the kinks out of my back. The sun was climbing higher, beating down with a growing intensity. I walked to the edge of my camp, scanning the impenetrable wall of reeds that marked the beginning of the deeper marsh. From my vantage point on the small rise, I could see nothing but a sea of green and brown, stretching endlessly towards a hazy horizon. No spire, no roofline, no telltale break in the vegetation. My rational mind argued for dismissal. It had to be an auditory illusion, a trick of the wind, or perhaps some bizarre animal call I hadn't encountered before, mimicking the sound of a bell. But the rhythm, the resonance, the sheer weight of the sound, it felt too distinct, too engineered to be anything but man-made. I spent the next hour trying to ignore it, trying to convince myself it was nothing. I tidied my camp, checked my gear, even tried to read my book again. But every time the wind stirred, I found myself holding my breath, listening, waiting. And sometimes faintly, sometimes a little clearer, the sound would return, dong, dong, dong. It was relentless in its slow, deliberate cadence, a phantom signal calling from the heart of the wild. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. The mystery was a hook, and I was well and truly caught. My professional training, ironically, was part of the problem. I was used to mapping the unknown, to bringing order and understanding to wild spaces. This bell was a complete anomaly, a data point that refused to fit into any existing framework, and I couldn't leave it alone. "All right, Marsh," I muttered, pulling on my heavy-duty waders and strapping on my utility belt. "You've got my attention." I packed light, a machete for the reeds, a small first aid kit, a compass, a bottle of water, a high-frequency whistle, and my satellite phone, though I knew signal would be unreliable deeper in. I also grabbed my waterproof GPS unit, not for navigation in the traditional sense, but to mark my entry point and track my meandering path. Even when pursuing an irrational mystery, a surveyor's habits die hard. My shotgun, usually kept handy for potential wildlife encounters, stayed in the tent. I wasn't hunting, and I certainly didn't want to go in there armed and jumpy. This felt less like a threat and more like a puzzle. Stepping off the dry, firm ground of my camp and into the marsh was like entering a different world. The initial stretch was deceptively easy, a thin layer of dark, peaty water over relatively solid ground, but the reeds immediately closed in, forming a dense, suffocating wall. They were taller than me, many reaching 10 or 12 feet, their thick stalks interlocking to create a tangled barrier. The air grew heavy and still, the sunlight filtering down in dappled, dusty shafts. The ever-present hum of mosquitoes intensified, a high-pitched whine that threatened to drive me mad even through the insect repellent I'd liberally applied. I pushed through the first few yards, the machete swinging in slow, rhythmic arcs, clearing a path just wide enough for me to squeeze through. The ground quickly softened. With each step, my waders sank deeper into the muck, the sucking sound a constant, unnerving companion. The water, initially clear enough to see the submerged roots, became opaque, dark brown with suspended silt and decaying vegetation. I couldn't see what I was stepping on or what might be lurking beneath the surface. The marsh itself seemed to resist my intrusion. Branches, submerged and rotted, caught at my waders. Hidden roots, thick as my arm, tripped me, sending me stumbling forward into the thorny embrace of brambles. Sweat plastered my clothes to my skin, and the exertion of fighting through the dense undergrowth was immense. My breath came in ragged gasps. I kept my ears open, listening intently for the bell. It was sporadic now, a whisper on the wind, hard to distinguish from the creaks and groans of the marsh itself. Sometimes I thought I heard it, a faint dong, but then it would vanish, leaving me only with the persistent buzzing of insects and the splash of unseen things in the water. My GPS unit, usually a steadfast companion, was proving less useful than I'd hoped. The dense canopy of reeds and cypress trees often blocked the satellite signal, making my position readings jumpy and unreliable. I relied more on my compass, trying to maintain a south-southwest trajectory, but the winding paths I was forced to take made straight progress impossible. I'd push through a particularly thick patch, only to find myself circling back or veering off course by dozens of yards. After what felt like an hour, but was likely closer to 45 minutes, I stopped, leaning against a gnarled cypress knee that rose like a twisted sculpture from the murky water. My heart hammered in my chest and my muscles ached. I took a long, grateful swig of water, the warm liquid tasting like nectar. The marsh was silent again, save for the hum. No bell, had I imagined it. Had the sheer isolation and monotony of my work finally gotten to me? Then, as if answering my unspoken doubt, it came. Closer this time, clearer, dong, dong, dong. My head snapped up. It was still ahead of me, slightly to my left now, perhaps west-southwest. The sound held a distinct resonance, a deeper vibration that seemed to penetrate the very ground I stood on. It was slow, deliberate, each peal separated by several seconds, allowing the sound to linger and fade before the next one began. There was no mistaking it. This was real. Reinvigorated by the confirmation, I pushed on, a renewed sense of purpose replacing my exhaustion. The terrain grew even more challenging. The water deepened in places, rising to my knees, sometimes even my thighs, making each step a laborious effort against the powerful suction of the mud. I stumbled into a hidden ditch, falling forward until my hands plunged into the cold, viscous liquid. The stench of decay, of stagnant water and rotting vegetation, grew stronger, filling my nostrils with a cloying, earthy odor. The reeds eventually gave way to denser stands of cypress, their skeletal branches draped with Spanish moss, creating an eerie, sun-dappled gloom. The ground here was a treacherous mosaic of exposed roots, shallow water, and deep, deceptive pockets of mud. I had to pick my way carefully, testing each step with my machete before committing my weight. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every splash in the water made me jump. My imagination, fueled by the isolation and the sheer strangeness of the situation, began to conjure up images of unseen creatures lurking in the shadows. After another period of intense effort, fighting through a particularly thorny patch of saw palm meadow, I emerged into a slightly more open area. The cypress trees here were older, their trunks broader, forming a sparse canopy overhead. The water was shallower, revealing more of the dark, rich earth, and there, ahead of me, just barely discernible through the filigree of moss-draped branches, was a shape. It wasn't natural. It was too angular, too regular, too stark against the organic chaos of the marsh. a vertical line, then a horizontal one, then another vertical. It was a structure or part of one. And as I drew closer, my heart began to pound not from exertion, but from a mix of apprehension and disbelief. The bell, which had faded again, now rang out with a startling clarity. Dong, dong, dong. It was close, very close, and it was coming from that shape. My pace quickened despite the treacherous footing. As I navigated around a particularly large cypress, the full view opened before me. It was a building, or what was left of one. And it was impossible. It stood half submerged in the murky water, its foundations swallowed by the marsh, like some ancient shipwreck run aground in a sea of mud and cypress. What must have once been a proud stone structure was now a crumbling ruin, reclaimed by the relentless embrace of the swamp. Moss and lichen formed a thick green pelt over its gray, weathered walls. Vines as thick as my arm snaked their way up the crumbling facade, pulling apart the mortar, prying stones loose. The cypress saplings grew from cracks in the masonry, their roots driving deep into the stone, slowly tearing the building apart from within. The bell tower, remarkably, was still largely intact, though clearly leaning precariously. Its upper reaches were swallowed by a tangle of vines, but I could make out the dark, gaping archways where the bells would have hung. One of those archways on the side facing me was clearer than the others, and through it I could just glimpse the dark, colossal shape of a bell. It was huge, far larger than I had anticipated, and it hung motionless. Yet I could still hear its mournful toll. Dong, dong, dong. My breath hitched. The bell wasn't moving. It was completely still. But the sound was undeniably there, echoing through the marsh. This was impossible, unless the sound wasn't coming from that bell, or at least not in the way I understood it. I cautiously approached the ruin, my waders squelching in the shallow water. The air around the structure felt different, colder, heavier, charged with an inexplicable stillness. The usual marsh sounds, the buzzing of insects, the chirping of birds, the splash of unseen things seemed to diminish, replaced by an unnatural quiet. Only the dong, dong, dong persisted, an insistent, rhythmic pulse in the silence. The building was clearly a church, or had been. The remnants of Gothic arches, faded stained glass window frames, the glass long since shattered or fallen out, and the faint outline of what might have been a cross on the steeple all spoke of its original purpose. But it was a church unlike any I had ever seen. The stone was dark, almost black, and gave off a peculiar, cold emanation, even under the afternoon sun. The architectural style was unfamiliar, a strange blend of European Gothic and something older, more primal, with unsettlingly sharp angles and heavy, almost brutalist elements not typically found in traditional church design. It felt ancient, pre-colonial even, but how could that be? There was no record of anything like this existing here. What struck me most was the profound sense of abandonment, a feeling that went beyond mere disuse. It was as if the building had been left in a hurry, perhaps even cursed, and the marsh had rushed in to consume it, erase it from memory. The vines weren't merely growing on it, they seemed to be actively devouring it, drawing it into the earth. I moved closer to the entrance, a gaping maw where heavy wooden doors must once have stood. Now only splintered, waterlogged remnants remained, hanging precariously from rusted hinges, half submerged in the murky water that filled the nave. The water inside seemed even darker, reflecting no light, an inky void stretching into the gloom of the interior. The bell continued its relentless tolling, now loud enough to make my teeth ache, a deep vibration resonating through my very bones. And still, the visible bell in the tower hung motionless. This was beyond strange, this was supernatural, or I was losing my mind. My surveyor's instincts, honed by years of skepticism and precise measurement, struggled to reconcile what I was seeing and hearing. There had to be a logical explanation, however improbable. A hidden mechanism, a recording, but the sound was too organic, too resonant, too real to be a recording. I hesitated at the threshold, a primal fear clutching at my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run, to flee this place of impossible sounds and forgotten ruins. But the insatiable curiosity, the need to understand, held me fast. I had come this far. I had to see. I had to know. Taking a deep breath, I waded into the dark water that pooled inside the church. The floor beneath my waders was uneven, covered in a thick layer of silt and God knows what. My flashlight, usually unnecessary in the daytime, now felt essential. I clicked it on, sending a beam cutting through the oppressive gloom. The interior was a scene of utter desolation. The once grand nave was a swampy mess, the roof partially collapsed, allowing shafts of weak, watery light to penetrate in places. Massive wooden beams, blackened with age and rot, lay scattered across the floor, half submerged. Pews were overturned, their rotten wood dissolving into the water. What might have been an altar at the far end was a mere mound of rubble and tangled vines. The air inside was thick, stagnant, smelling strongly of damp earth, decay, and something else, a faint, metallic tang like old iron or dried blood. The silence, broken only by the incessant dong, 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 was profound. It felt as if time itself had stopped here, or perhaps never quite reached this place. The source of the bell's sound seemed to come from deeper within the structure, perhaps from behind the collapsed altar or from a hidden crypt beneath the church. My flashlight beam danced across the crumbling walls, revealing strange, faded frescoes or carvings, almost entirely obscured by moss and grime. I couldn't make out any clear images, but the vague shapes hinted at disturbing, angular figures, not the gentle saints or biblical scenes one would expect. I waded slowly, carefully, my eyes straining to pierce the gloom. The water was waist-deep in places, and I felt slimy things brush against my waders, making me jump. A cold dread settled over me, a feeling of being watched, of being an intruder in a place that had been left undisturbed for centuries. The bell's tolling continued, a relentless throb that seemed to come from all directions and no direction at once. It was disorienting, and I found myself struggling to maintain my sense of direction within the decaying structure. My GPS was useless inside, and the compass spun wildly, probably due to some localized magnetic anomaly or the sheer amount of ancient iron in the structure. I pushed towards the back of the church, where the sound seemed strongest. The path was increasingly difficult, blocked by fallen debris and submerged hazards. I tripped over something hard and unyielding, nearly falling headfirst into the putrid water. My flashlight beam plunged into the murky depths for a terrifying second before I regained my footing. When I brought it back up, it illuminated a section of the wall that had been less ravaged by time and vegetation. And there, amongst the strange, obscured carvings, was something unmistakable, a symbol. It was not a cross. It was an intricate, angular design, a series of interlocking triangles and circles, vaguely reminiscent of ancient runic symbols, but more complex, more sinister. It seemed to pulse with a faint, almost imperceptible luminescence under my flashlight beam, or perhaps that was just a trick of my tired eyes. As I stared at the symbol, a new sound began to overlay the bell's toll. A faint, almost imperceptible hum, a low vibration that seemed to emanate from the very stones around me. It was like a chord being slowly drawn out, deep and resonant, a sound that seemed to speak of immense power, barely contained. It was an unnerving, almost living sound. The air grew even colder, and I could see my breath fogging in the beam of my flashlight, despite the oppressive heat outside. Goosebumps rose on my arms, a primal response to the sudden, inexplicable drop in temperature. The hum intensified, rising in pitch, and with it, the bell's tolling seemed to quicken, losing its slow, deliberate cadence. Dong 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 dong, it was becoming frantic, desperate, a chaotic cacophony that echoed through the ruined church, assaulting my ears. A shiver of pure terror shot through me. This wasn't just a forgotten ruin. This was something else entirely, something ancient and awake. I stumbled back, my mind screaming to get out. The water, the debris, the oppressive gloom, everything seemed to conspire against my escape. The bell's frantic clamor was deafening now, reverberating through my skull, making my teeth ache. The low hum had risen to a keening whine, a sound that felt like it was tearing at the fabric of reality. As I turned to flee, my flashlight beam swung wildly, catching something in a darkened alcove to my left. It was a recess in the crumbling stone, mostly obscured by fallen rubble and a curtain of thick, black moss. But in the brief flash of light, I saw something that froze me to the spot. A face. Not a carved face, not a statue. A real face. Peering out from the shadows, its features obscured by darkness and grime, but undeniably human. And its eyes were wide open, staring directly at me. It was pale, almost translucent, and seemed to be part of the wall itself, or perhaps buried within it. It was too still, too unnaturally fixed. Not alive, but not entirely dead either, not in the way a corpse is dead. It was something else, something preserved, trapped. The bell's ringing reached a crescendo, a shattering explosion of sound that threatened to burst my eardrums. The keening hum became a roar, a tempest of raw, vibrational energy. The very air around me began to crackle like static electricity before a lightning strike. I tore my gaze away from the horrifying face. A scream caught in my throat. Every fiber of my being demanded escape. I plunged back through the murky water, scrambling over obstacles, my movements clumsy and panicked. The terrifying sounds chased me, a physical force pressing down on my back, urging me forward. I could feel the cold, damp air rushing past me, hear the groaning of the ancient structure as if it too were screaming. I didn't look back, I just ran, splashing through the knee-deep water, fueled by an adrenaline-soaked terror I had never experienced before. I burst out of the church entrance, gasping for breath, my lungs burning. The relative light of the marsh outside was a welcome relief, but the sounds followed me, still echoing through the cypress trees, though slightly muted now. I didn't stop to catch my breath or check my bearings. I just thrashed my way back into the dense reeds, pushing through the tangled vegetation with a frantic energy born of pure survival instinct. My machete swung wildly, barely clearing a path. I stumbled, fell, picked myself up, and kept going. The marsh, which had seemed so hostile on the way in, now felt like a desperate refuge, a place to disappear and hide from the horrors I had just witnessed. The further I got from the church, the fainter the bell's frantic toll became, gradually subsiding from a chaotic clamor to its original slow, deliberate dong-dong-dong. The keening hum also faded, replaced by the familiar symphony of the marsh, the buzzing insects, the distant bird calls, the rustle of reeds in the wind. But the memory of the face, the impossible sounds, the sheer, profound wrongness of that place was seared into my mind. I didn't stop until I burst out of the last wall of reeds, collapsing onto the familiar, relatively dry ground of my campsite. My waders were ripped, my clothes were soaked and torn, my hands were scraped and bleeding, and my heart was still hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I lay there for a long time, gasping, shaking, staring up at the darkening sky, trying to process what had just happened. It was no trick of the light, no auditory illusion. It was real. A forgotten, impossible church deep in the Blackwood Marsh, a church that rang bells that weren't moving, pulsed with an ancient, terrifying hum, and held faces trapped in its crumbling walls. My rational mind, my surveyor's precise, logical mind, had been utterly shattered. This was beyond mapping, beyond measurement, beyond any explanation I could conceive. I was no longer an independent, self-reliant surveyor. I was just a man deeply, irrevocably shaken by an encounter with something ancient, something evil, something that should not exist. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows across the marsh. The first stars began to prickle through the deepening blue. From the depths of the marsh, barely audible now, almost a whisper, the bell rang once more. Dong, dong, dong. A slow, deliberate, haunting toll that seemed to call out into the vast, indifferent wilderness. A call to something or from something. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my bones that I had only scratched the surface of Blackwood Marsh's true secret. I had seen too much, and the marsh, it seemed, was not yet done with me. The last faint toll of the bell seemed to echo directly in my bones, a ghost note lingering in the twilight. I lay on the damp ground of my camp, breath coming in ragged gasps, trying to force my shaking limbs to cooperate, to stand, to do something. But my body felt like lead, my muscles screaming in protest, every nerve ending frayed. My waders, once robust, were now a tattered mess, snagged and torn in a dozen places. My hands were a map of scrapes and punctures, dark earth clinging to the open wounds. The stench of marsh mud and decay clung to me like a shroud. My mind, however, was in far worse shape. It raced, spiraled, lurched from one impossible image to the next. The still bell, the guttural hum, the ancient symbol, and worst of all, the face. That pale, unmoving face, eyes wide open, staring from the crumbling wall, an eternal witness to some unspeakable horror. It was an image burned into my retina, searing into my memory. I pushed myself up, slowly, painfully, my head swimming. The familiar comfort of my small tent, the smell of canvas and campfire smoke, was little solace. The marsh, just beyond the line of reeds, no longer felt like a place of quiet solitude. It felt like a malevolent entity, breathing, watching, waiting. I stumbled towards my water cooler, grabbing a gallon jug and dousing my face, then taking long, desperate gulps. The water, warm and metallic tasting, did little to quench the thirst that came from terror. My hands still trembled so violently that I almost dropped the jug. Every instinct screamed at me to pack up right now under the cover of the dwindling light and drive away. To leave Blackwood Marsh behind forever, to forget the impossible church, to convince myself it was a hallucination, a stress-induced nightmare. But as I glanced at my truck, a wave of profound weariness washed over me. I was too exhausted, too disoriented. My body was wrecked and my mind was a maelstrom. Driving an hour on winding dirt roads in this state would be more dangerous than staying put. Besides, there was that other, more insidious pull, the surveyor's obsession, the need to understand, to map, to know. Even as raw terror clawed at me, a tiny, insane part of my brain whispered, what was it? How could it be? The sheer audacity of such an anomaly, an entire forgotten church swallowed by the swamp, defying all known history and geography. It was a professional impossibility, an intellectual challenge that, under different circumstances, would have thrilled me. Now it just terrified me, but the seed was planted. I couldn't simply walk away, not yet. I spent the next hour meticulously cleaning my wounds, disinfecting every cut and scrape with the supplies from my first aid kit. The pain was a grounding force, a reminder that my body, at least, was still operating within the realm of the physical. As I worked, I kept glancing towards the marsh, towards the direction of the church. The air was silent now, save for the nightly chorus of crickets and frogs. The bell had stopped. Or perhaps it was just too far, too faint to hear over the hammering of my own heart. Darkness fell completely, thick and heavy. I built a fire, piling on extra logs, letting the flames leap high into the night. It was a primal comfort, a defiant beacon against the encroaching shadows. I sat by it, clutching a hot mug of coffee, the warmth doing little to thaw the icy dread that had settled deep within me. Sleep was an impossibility. Every rustle of leaves, every splash in the distant water sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. My mind replayed the images, the sounds, the feeling of utter wrongness. I tried to apply logic to construct rational explanations. A hidden speaker system, some elaborate prank, but the sheer scale of the ruins, the palpable age of the stones, the crushing weight of that ancient hum, it defied any sane explanation. And the face. I remembered my satellite phone. I pulled it out, hands still shaking, and tried to get a signal. Nothing. The screen displayed no service, a damning indictment of my isolation. There was no one to call, no one to tell. I was utterly alone with this impossible secret. The night stretched on, interminable. I watched the fire burn down, then built it up again, over and over, until the first hint of gray began to paint the eastern sky. My body ached with exhaustion, but my mind remained hyper-alert, trapped in a loop of fear and disbelief. As dawn broke, painting the marsh in soft hues of pink and gold, the world seemed to return to some semblance of normalcy. The chirping birds sounded cheerful, the mist rising from the water looked ethereal, not menacing. It was almost possible to believe it had all been a nightmare. Almost. But then I saw my ripped waders, the dried mud caked on my clothes, the fading but undeniable scratches on my arms. The evidence was real. The church was real. A profound sense of despair washed over me. What now? I was a land surveyor. My job was to map, to define, to bring clarity to spaces. This place shattered all definitions. It was a hole in reality, a gaping wound in the familiar world. I needed to leave, I really did, but another thought gnawed at me. If I left, this place would remain. Undiscovered, unheard, a cancerous secret festering in the heart of the marsh. And what if it wasn't dormant? What if it could reach out? The feeling of not yet done with me was a heavy weight. I walked to the edge of my camp, scanning the dense wall of reeds that marked the entrance to the deeper marsh. The air was still, quiet, no bell, no hum, just the usual morning symphony of the wetlands. Had it all simply retreated? I picked up my GPS unit. It had been jumpy yesterday, but it was still a critical tool. I powered it on, letting it acquire satellites. Then I looked at the track I'd laid yesterday. It was a squiggly line, erratic and disjointed, as if drawn by a drunkard. The dense canopy and magnetic anomalies must have wreaked havoc on its precision. I could make out a general south-southwest trajectory, but the exact location of the church was vague, marked by a cluster of unreliable points. If I wanted to find it again, I'd have to go back. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. Go back, into that place. My blood ran cold. But the alternative was to leave this impossible anomaly undocumented, unexplained. It was a professional sin, an unforgivable omission, and a personal cowardice I didn't want to admit. I knew deep down I couldn't just walk away. My curiosity, once a tool for discovery, had become a dangerous addiction. I needed answers, or at least more data, even if those answers threatened to unravel my sanity. I brewed a strong pot of coffee, trying to quell the tremors in my hands. I ate a sparse breakfast, forcing down dry granola bars, my appetite completely gone. I meticulously checked my gear again, fresh batteries for the flashlight, a full bottle of water, extra medical supplies, my satellite phone, still no signal, and this time I added my shotgun to the pack. Yesterday, it felt like a puzzle. Today, I wasn't so sure. That face, the hum, it might be something that required more than a machete. By mid-morning, I was ready. The sun was climbing, its heat already intense. The marsh looked deceptively peaceful. I took a deep breath, trying to push down the fear that gnawed at my stomach, and stepped off the familiar ground of my camp back into the wall of reeds. This time, the journey felt different. I was not exploring, I was returning to a known horror. Every rustle of leaves was magnified, every splash in the water seemed to contain a hidden threat. My senses were hyper-alert, attuned to every subtle shift in the environment. The machete swung with a grim determination, clearing a path through the dense vegetation. I focused on the general direction, trying to retrace my steps, or at least the path I had intended to take. The water was just as deep, the mud just as treacherous, the mosquitoes just as relentless. But this time I had a target. I was looking for familiar landmarks, a particularly gnarled cypress, a dense thicket of saw palmetto, a deep patch of water where I'd stumbled. The silence was unnerving, no bell, not a single dong. It was almost worse than hearing it, because the absence of the sound only deepened the mystery, made the church feel even more spectral, more unreal. Was it truly gone? Had I somehow imagined it? The doubt was a cruel twist in the gut. After what felt like an eternity, I pushed through a curtain of Spanish moss and saw it again. The silhouette, the impossible angles, the leaning tower, my breath caught in my throat. It was still there, as grim and silent as a tombstone. The sight filled me with a strange mix of dread and morbid relief. I hadn't imagined it. I wasn't losing my mind, but the reality was almost worse. I approached cautiously, my shotgun held ready, the safety off. The air around the church still felt different, cold and heavy, even under the strong morning sun. The usual marsh sounds still seemed to mute themselves near the structure, replaced by an oppressive stillness. The exterior of the church was exactly as I remembered it. Moss-covered stones, vines like grasping tentacles, the gaping maw of the entrance. The large bell in the tower hung motionless, dark and silent. I hesitated at the threshold, remembering the sheer terror of my retreat. Every cell in my body screamed against re-entering. But the surveyor's drive, the need to quantify the unquantifiable, was stronger than the fear, just barely. Taking another deep, shuddering breath, I stepped back into the inky water that filled the nave. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom. The interior was as desolate as before, the air thick with the scent of decay. No bell, no hum. The silence within was profound, broken only by the slosh of my waders and the frantic beat of my own heart. It was a suffocating quiet, pregnant with unseen things. I moved slowly, meticulously, trying to observe every detail. My eyes scanned the crumbling walls, the fallen beams, the murky water. I shone my light on the strange, faded frescoes. This time, in the absence of the bell's clamor and the hum's roar, I could make out more details. The angular figures were indeed disturbing. Elongated, disproportionate limbs, strange, masked faces, engaged in what looked like ritualistic movements around a central, glowing symbol, the same interlocking triangles and circles I had seen on the wall. They were not human, not quite, but something twisted, ancient, and undeniably malevolent. I approached the alcove where I had seen the face. My heart hammered against my ribs. I shone my light into the recess, my hand gripping the shotgun tighter. It was still there. The face, pale and translucent, seemed even more disturbing in the stark light of my powerful beam. It was undeniably human, or had been. The skin was stretched taut, almost waxy, pulled back from the bone in places. The eyes were wide open, staring, pupils dilated and black, reflecting the flashlight's beam like polished obsidian. It looked less like a corpse and more like a fossil, perfectly preserved, yet utterly dead. It was subtly different than I remembered. The grime seemed slightly less, the features a little sharper, as if the very act of my viewing it had brought it into sharper focus. It was horrifying. I forced myself to move closer, to examine it. It was set into the stone, not merely resting against it. The impression was that the face was part of the wall, that it had been consumed by the very structure of the church. It wasn't just a face, it was the face, a testament to some unimaginable absorption. I reached out a trembling hand, then pulled it back. No, I couldn't touch it. I couldn't risk it. I took several photographs with my phone, though I doubted the low light and the phone's capabilities would capture the chilling reality of it. The lack of cellular service meant I couldn't transmit them, but at least I'd have a record. A cold, hard, incontrovertible record. After documenting the face, I turned my attention to the source of the bell's sound, the area behind the collapsed altar. The path was even more treacherous here, a jumble of fallen masonry, splintered wood, and submerged rubble. I picked my way carefully, testing each step with my boot, wary of hidden drops or hazards. The air here was even colder, the scent of decay stronger, tinged with that faint metallic tang. I shone my light on the back wall, behind where the altar would have been. It was heavily overgrown with thick black moss and vines, but through the foliage I could discern another, much larger symbol carved into the stone. It was the same design of interlocking triangles and circles, but it pulsed now with a faint, almost imperceptible internal light, a deep, reddish glow that seemed to emanate from within the stone itself. It was barely visible, but it was there, a slow, rhythmic throb. As I stared at the symbol, I felt a subtle vibration through the soles of my waders, a faint tremor in the very ground beneath me. It was the hum, not the ear-splitting roar from yesterday, but a very low, almost subliminal thrum, like a giant, ancient engine idling deep underground. It resonated directly in my chest, a deep, unsettling bass note. I aimed my flashlight at the base of the symbol. The water here was deeper, swirling with a faint phosphorescence, though I couldn't tell if it was from decaying organic matter or something else entirely. As I peered closer, I saw a subtle break in the stone, a crack that seemed to emanate from the glowing symbol, widening slightly into a narrow, dark opening just above the waterline. It looked like a hidden passage, almost entirely obscured by moss and fallen debris. My heart pounded. This was it. This was the source of the hum, perhaps the bell. This was the true heart of the mystery. The thought of entering that dark, cramped space filled me with an icy dread. It was a primal fear, a warning to retreat, to leave the ancient horrors undisturbed. But the surveyor's hunger for the unknown, the insatiable need to uncover what lay beneath, urged me forward. I knew this was beyond reckless, it was suicidal, but the story of this place, if it was to be told, had to be uncovered, and I was the only one here. I rechecked my shotgun, made sure my flashlight beam was strong, and took a deep breath that tasted of dust and ancient decay. I squeezed through the narrow opening, pushing aside thick, clinging vines and loose rubble. The passage was immediately dark, completely devoid of natural light. The air was heavy, still, and colder than anything I had experienced inside the main church. The low hum intensified, vibrating through the very stone, making my teeth ache. The passage sloped downwards, a narrow, uneven tunnel carved crudely from what felt like natural rock, but with definite signs of ancient primitive tools. It was clearly man-made or something made. The walls were rough, wet, and slick with some kind of dark, viscous slime. I had to hunch over, my waders dragging in the increasingly deep, cold water. The ceiling was low, pressing in, making me feel claustrophobic. My flashlight beam struggled to penetrate the absolute darkness. It felt like I was descending into the very bowels of the earth. The hum was now a constant, droning presence, a deep, resonant sound that filled my head, making my ears ache. It was not a mechanical hum, but something organic, a living vibration. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, the passage opened into a larger chamber. My flashlight beam cut through the oppressive gloom, revealing a space that seemed impossibly vast given the narrow tunnel that led to it. It was an underground cavern, not natural, but clearly carved out, its walls rough-hewn, showing the marks of immense labor. The ceiling was lost in shadows, but I could make out colossal pillars of stone supporting it, crude but powerful. The air here was even colder, carrying the faint metallic tang that was now becoming a familiar scent. And in the center of the chamber, surrounded by a pool of dark, still water, stood a massive, monolithic structure. It was a pedestal crafted from the same dark, black stone as the church above, but larger, more imposing, rising almost 20 feet from the water. And upon it, bathed in a faint, eerie, reddish glow that pulsed in time with the hum, was the source of the bell's sound. It was not a bell as I understood it. It was a titanic, obsidian-like column, roughly cylindrical, at least 15 feet tall and 10 feet in diameter. Its surface was smooth, almost polished, but not reflective, absorbing the light of my flashlight into its inky blackness. And carved into its sides from top to bottom were the same intricate angular symbols I had seen in the church above. The interlocking triangles and circles, repeated over and over, pulsing with that faint internal light. The hum was deafening here, a physical force that vibrated through my entire body, making my bones ache. And the bell was coming from the column itself. Dung, dung, dong. The sound was immense, resonating through the cavern, echoing off the rough-hewn walls. But the column was not moving. There was no clapper, no visible mechanism. The sound simply emanated from it, deep and sonorous, a relentless, mournful toll. It was as if the stone itself was ringing, a sound generated from within its very core. I was paralyzed, a mixture of profound awe and soul-crushing terror locking me in place. This was beyond anything I could have conceived. An entire structure buried deep beneath the earth, generating a sound that defied all known physics. I took photographs, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone into the water. The low light and the sheer scale of the monolith made it difficult to capture, but I needed something, anything, to prove what I was seeing. As I circled the perimeter of the pool, keeping a respectful distance from the pulsing column, my flashlight beam swept across the cavern walls. And there, recessed into the stone, arranged in a semicircle around the central monolith, were more faces. Dozens of them, hundreds. They were everywhere, seamlessly integrated into the rock like the one in the church above. pale, waxy, preserved faces, eyes wide open, staring sightlessly into the cavern. Some were distorted, screaming in silent agony, mouths agape. Others were serene, almost peaceful, but all were unsettlingly still, trapped forever in the stone. Men, women, children, their expressions spoke of a diverse group, but they shared a common fate, absorbed by this dreadful place. A horrifying realization dawned on me. The church above ground was merely the entrance, a visible marker. This chamber, this monstrous column, and these trapped faces were the true heart of whatever this place was, and the faces were not just some random macabre decoration. They were offerings, sacrifices, or perhaps they were absorbed, consumed by the very structure that powered the ringing and the hum. The air grew even colder, and a palpable sense of ancient malice seemed to emanate from the column, from the faces. It was a place of immense, unspeakable power, a power that fed on life, that trapped souls, that resonated with an evil too profound for words. The bell's toll seemed to quicken, the hum grew louder, more insistent, pressing in on my skull. The reddish glow from the symbols on the column intensified, casting dancing shadows across the grim faces in the wall. It was almost as if my presence, my observation, had awakened something or provoked it. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over me, far stronger than anything I had felt before. This was not just a strange ruin. This was a living, breathing entity, a monstrous thing that devoured and preserved, that pulsed with an ancient, dark energy. And I was an intruder, a trespasser. My mind screamed, "Get out now." I spun around, ignoring the treachery of the water, splashing back towards the narrow passage. The column's low, resonant dong seemed to follow me, vibrating up my spine. The hum was a roaring torrent in my ears, making my head throb. The faces in the walls, in the flickering light of my frantic retreat, seemed to twist, their eyes following me. I scrambled back into the narrow passage, scraping my shoulders, my waders catching on submerged roots. I didn't care about the pain. I just needed to get out, to escape the suffocating presence of that place. The passage seemed longer, colder, darker than before, the walls pressing in on me, threatening to crush me. I pushed myself upwards towards the faint glimmer of light from the church interior, gasping for breath, my lungs burning. The sounds from the cavern below pursued me, an unrelenting crescendo of bell and hum, a tangible force against my back. I burst out of the passage, collapsing onto the waterlogged floor of the church nave. The muted light from the collapsed roof seemed blinding, but it was a welcome relief from the absolute darkness of the cavern. The bell and hum were still loud, echoing through the church, but slightly muffled, as if the very stone was trying to contain the sound. I didn't stop. I thrashed through the waist-deep water, scrambling over the fallen debris, my mind fixed on the gaping entrance to the marsh. The church felt like a cage, and the sounds within were the roars of the beast. I stumbled out into the relative light of the marsh, gasping for air, gulping in the fresh, clean scent of damp earth and living plants. The sounds from the church followed, a deep, resonant dong and the insistent hum, but they began to recede almost immediately, swallowed by the dense reeds and cypress trees. I plunged into the undergrowth, not caring about the path, just pushing forward away from the impossible horror. My machete swung wildly, clearing a path through the dense vegetation, but my focus was entirely on escape. I stumbled, fell, rose again, driven by pure terror. I didn't stop until I burst out onto the dry ground of my campsite, collapsing once more, chest heaving, lungs burning. I lay there for a long time, eyes closed, listening to the familiar sounds of the marsh, the chirping crickets, the buzzing insects, the distant cry of a hawk. The absence of the bell's toll, the hum, was a fragile, precious silence. My body was racked with exhaustion, my muscles screaming, but my mind was in overdrive, replaying the images. The colossal black column, the ringing stone, the hundreds of faces, silently screaming from their rocky prisons. It was a nightmare made real, a monstrous secret hidden beneath the marsh. I knew with absolute certainty that I could not stay another moment. My curiosity had been sated brutally, irrevocably. I had seen too much. I had uncovered a truth that was not meant for human eyes, a truth that threatened to tear apart the fabric of my reality. This was not a job anymore. This was survival. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the searing pain in my legs. I had to pack up. Now, the sun was already high in the sky, beating down relentlessly, but I moved with a frantic energy I hadn't known I possessed. My hands, though still trembling, worked with a furious efficiency, dismantling the tent, rolling up the sleeping bag, stowing my gear into the truck. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every rustle of the reeds seemed to whisper a warning. I kept glancing towards the marsh, half expecting the bell to resume its mournful toll, or the earth to split open and reveal more horrors. Within an hour, everything was loaded. My campsite, which had felt like a safe haven just 2 days ago, now felt like a temporary prison I was desperate to escape. I climbed into the cab of my truck, slamming the door shut with a sense of desperate finality. The engine roared to life, a comforting, familiar sound of power and escape. I put the truck in gear, reversed, and began the long, winding drive out of Blackwood Marsh. My eyes darted constantly to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a shadowy figure emerge from the trees or the impossible church to rise from the bog. But there was nothing, only the endless, swaying reeds, the silent, indifferent wilderness. The long dirt track stretched before me, mile after mile. As I drove, the events of the past 24 hours began to coalesce to form a coherent, terrifying narrative in my mind. It wasn't a nightmare, it was real, and I had the photographs, grainy and poorly lit though they were, as proof. What was I supposed to do with this? Who would believe me? A forgotten church, a ringing stone column, faces trapped in walls, a primordial hum. It sounded like the ravings of a madman. My professional reputation would be shattered. My sanity would be questioned. As I finally reached the paved road, leaving the dirt and gravel behind, a profound sense of relief washed over me. I was out. I had escaped. But it was quickly replaced by a chilling realization. I could leave the marsh, but the marsh, or at least its secret, had left an indelible mark on me. It was inside my head, woven into the very fabric of my being. I knew I couldn't just go back to my house, try to forget it, and resume my normal life. The world was no longer the same. The quiet corners I once loved now held unimaginable horrors. And I, an ordinary surveyor, was burdened with a knowledge that could shatter the sanity of anyone who encountered it. The thought of reporting this, of trying to explain it to anyone, filled me with dread. They would dismiss me, mock me, institutionalize me. I had to choose: protect my sanity and reputation by denying what I saw, or reveal the impossible truth and risk everything. As I drove further away, leaving the wild, untamed lands of Blackwood Marsh behind, a new question began to form in my mind, a cold, insidious whisper. Why had it allowed me to leave? Why had the bell, the hum, the entity in the stone not stopped me? Was it truly finished with me? Or had I merely been allowed to escape, a carrier of its terrible secret, a seed of its awakening planted in the outside world? The sun was sinking towards the horizon, painting the clouds in fiery hues of orange and red. I drove faster, wanting to put as much distance as possible between myself and that cursed place. But no matter how far I drove, I knew the silence of the marsh and the ringing of its impossible bell would follow me into the darkest corners of my dreams. My life, my perception of reality, had been irrevocably changed. And I knew with a chilling certainty that this was far from over. The paved road offered no comfort, only the illusion of escape. Each mile I put between myself and the marsh felt like a temporary reprieve, a borrowed breath before the next plunge into the cold, crushing reality of what I had seen. My truck, once a symbol of independence and control, now felt like a fragile shell, barely shielding me from an invisible, insidious dread. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in angry shades of crimson and violet. Darkness swallowed the highway, and the familiar glow of distant towns began to appear, but they offered no warmth. My mind reeled, a chaotic maelstrom of images and sensations. The still bell, the throbbing hum, the faces, oh God, the faces. Each one was a shard of ice in my memory, chilling me to the bone. I drove for hours, aimlessly at first, just needing to be away. I passed through small towns, their streetlights casting mundane, comforting halos, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. The thought of checking into a motel, of lying alone in a silent room, was unbearable. The silence would only amplify the echoes in my head. Eventually, exhaustion won out. My eyes burned, my muscles screamed, and the adrenaline that had fueled my escape finally began to ebb, leaving me drained and hollow. I pulled over at a roadside rest stop, parking far from the few other vehicles, needing to be alone. I turned off the engine, plunging the truck into a sudden, unsettling quiet. The silence was immediately filled by the phantom dong, dong, dong in my mind, a slow, mournful toll that resonated deep within my chest. I gasped, pressing my hands to my ears as if I could physically block out the sound that wasn't there. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. I closed my eyes, trying to force my breathing to slow. My body still trembled, a delayed reaction to the trauma. I tried to focus on something mundane, something real, the texture of the steering wheel, the hum of distant traffic on the highway, the faint scent of stale coffee in the cab. Sleep refused to come. Every time my eyes drooped, the faces appeared behind my eyelids, their wide, black eyes staring, their mouths contorted in silent screams. I saw the colossal black column pulsing with that sinister red glow, its impossible bell tolling from within. I felt the cold, the hum, the ancient malice. I jolted awake with a strangled cry, drenched in cold sweat, gasping for air. The night was an eternity of terror and fragmented rest. I must have drifted off occasionally, because when I finally opened my eyes, a faint gray light was painting the eastern sky. The world outside the truck looked washed out, unfamiliar. My mouth was dry, my head pounded, and a crushing headache gnawed at my temples. I felt like I hadn't slept in days. I started the truck, the engine's roar a welcome disruption to the oppressive quiet. I found a gas station in the next town, filled up, and bought the strongest coffee I could find, along with a sugary pastry. The sweet, processed taste was a shock to my system, but it did little to settle the churning in my stomach. I felt detached, observing myself from a distance, a stranger in my own skin. My original plan had been to drive straight home to my small, meticulously organized apartment in the city. But the thought of it, of entering that familiar space with this new, terrible knowledge, felt wrong. It felt like I would be polluting it, bringing the darkness of the marsh into my carefully constructed life. Instead, I drove. For another full day, I drove, putting hundreds of miles between me and Blackwood Marsh, though I knew the distance was irrelevant. The marsh had already come with me. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stop, couldn't truly rest. The highway became a blur, the passing landscapes a meaningless backdrop to the internal landscape of my fear. I finally pulled into a small, nondescript motel on the outskirts of a town I didn't recognize, too exhausted to continue. The room was sterile, impersonal, and dimly lit, but it felt safer than the utter isolation of the truck. I showered, scrubbing at my skin as if to wash away the marsh's grime, but the stench of decay and ancient cold seemed to cling to me still. I tried to eat, but my stomach rebelled. I lay on the bed, staring at the popcorn ceiling, feeling utterly, profoundly alone. I pulled out my phone, still no signal here, but I scrolled through my photos. The grainy, blurry images of the church's exterior, the impossible angles, the moss-covered stone. Then the interior shots, the flooded nave, the collapsed roof, the faded frescoes with their angular, inhuman figures. And finally, the face. Even through the poor resolution and dim lighting, its unsettling reality was undeniable. The wide, black eyes, the stretched, waxy skin, the silent, eternal stare from the stone wall. I shivered, a cold tremor running through me despite the warmth of the room. It was real, all of it. Then I found the photos from the underground cavern. The colossal black column, pulsing with that faint red glow, its surface carved with the repeating, sinister symbols. And around it, half obscured by shadow and low light, were the hundreds of faces, silently screaming, eternally trapped. My breath hitched. The images were chilling, undeniable proof. But who would ever believe them? They looked like something out of a horror movie, not a professional surveyor's field photos. They could be dismissed as fakes, elaborate digital manipulations. My reputation would be destroyed if I presented them without context, without explanation. And what explanation could I possibly offer? The thought of contacting the authorities, of trying to explain this to a disbelieving police officer or a condescending academic, filled me with a deep weariness. I could already hear their patronizing tones, their suggestions of mental fatigue, hallucination, or worse. I was an ordinary man, a practical, logical surveyor. This was beyond my scope, beyond theirs. A new, unsettling thought began to form in my mind. If I couldn't tell anyone, if I couldn't just forget it, what then? The knowledge was a poisoned gift, a burden I was forced to carry. The why me question echoed. Why had I stumbled upon it? Why had it allowed me to leave? The longer I considered it, the more insidious the thought became. Perhaps it hadn't allowed me to leave. Perhaps it had sent me out into the world, a carrier of its secret, a seed of its influence. The very idea made my skin crawl. I needed to understand, not just for myself, but because the alternative was to be haunted forever, to live with this impossible, unquantifiable horror bubbling beneath the surface of my consciousness. I had to try. I had to find answers, even if they were terrifying. My surveyor's brain, despite its recent shattering, still craved data, still sought patterns, connections. Blackwood Marsh wasn't just a random location. It was a wilderness, but it was also on something. There had to be a history, a legend, something that could provide a clue. I spent the next few days in a self-imposed exile, holed up in the motel room, ordering food delivery, barely venturing outside. I used my laptop, connected to the motel's slow Wi-Fi, to delve into research. I started with broad searches: Blackwood Marsh history, Florida swamp legends, forgotten churches. The results were mostly mundane. Articles about local flora and fauna, ecological studies, occasional news reports about hikers getting lost or minor crimes. Nothing about ancient, impossible churches. Nothing about ringing stones or faces in walls. I widened my net. I searched for anomalous geological features, pre-colonial structures in the Americas, unexplained ruins. Still nothing that fit. The internet, that vast repository of human knowledge, was frustratingly silent on this particular anomaly. It was as if Blackwood Marsh's secret was so profound, so utterly outside the realm of human understanding, that it simply didn't exist in any accessible record. The lack of information was almost as terrifying as the discovery itself. It confirmed the utter isolation of the phenomenon, its deliberate erasure from history. Who would build such a place, and why? I moved on to more esoteric searches, using keywords like sounding stones, chthonic entities, sacrificial architecture, bound spirits. This led me down darker, more obscure paths into forums dedicated to occultism, ancient mysteries, and fringe theories. The language was often fantastical, the claims outlandish, but a tiny part of me, now open to the impossible, listened. I found scattered references to telluric currents, powerful electromagnetic energies believed to emanate from the Earth. Some theories posited that ancient civilizations built structures on these nodes to harness or amplify these energies. Could the hum be a manifestation of such a current, and the bell a resonant frequency, a sound amplification effect? It was a stretch, but it was the closest thing to a rational explanation I could find. Then there were the more disturbing theories. Whispers of elder gods, extra-dimensional entities, and places where reality thins. These were the domains of H.P. Lovecraft and similar authors, stories I had always dismissed as mere fiction. Now they felt chillingly prescient. The angular architecture, the profound sense of malevolence, the faces, they aligned disturbingly well with the tropes of cosmic horror. I found a few obscure academic papers on paleogeology and indigenous ritual sites, focusing on lesser-known pre-Columbian cultures in the southeastern United States. These hinted at complex belief systems, earth worship, and even human sacrifice in certain isolated, swampy regions. But again, no specifics, no mention of anything resembling what I had seen. The descriptions were vague, abstract, nothing concrete. My research became an obsession. I slept little, ate less, fueled by strong coffee and an insatiable, terrifying need to understand. My mental state deteriorated. I grew gaunt, my eyes shadowed, my temper frayed. I started seeing things in the periphery of my vision, fleeting shadows, glimmers of reddish light. The phantom bell became more insistent, sometimes a distant whisper, sometimes a throbbing presence in my skull. One evening, staring blankly at my laptop screen, a thought struck me. My GPS. The track from my first trip, though erratic, still represented a path to the church. What if the anomalies weren't just disrupting the signal randomly? What if they were doing something specific? I pulled out my GPS unit, plugged it into my laptop, and tried to download the raw data from my last trek. It was a jumble, as expected, but I tried to overlay it on a high-resolution topographical map of the marsh, one I had on my hard drive. As I painstakingly aligned the coordinates, struggling with the glitches and jumps in the data, a faint pattern began to emerge. The GPS readings weren't just random. They seemed to curve, to pull towards something. And when I zoomed in on the cluster of unreliable points marking the church's location, I noticed something else. The surrounding terrain, usually a chaotic mess of elevation changes in the marsh, seemed to resolve into something subtly unnatural. A faint, circular depression, almost imperceptible to the naked eye, centered precisely on the church's coordinates. It was barely a foot deep, spanning perhaps a quarter mile, but it was too regular, too symmetrical for a natural formation in such a boggy, shifting environment. And within that subtle depression, the water table seemed abnormally high, even for the marsh. It was a sinkhole, I realized, or a former one that had filled in, but one that somehow held its shape. A basin. My surveyor's instinct, rusty but still present, told me this was significant. Such a feature, so perfectly circular, hinted at a deeper, underlying structure, something that had created or maintained that depression over geological time. A massive, hidden foundation, perhaps, or something else entirely. I started cross-referencing this location with old geological surveys, seismic data, anything I could get my hands on. Most maps of the marsh were imprecise, simply labeling it undifferentiated wetlands. But a few older, more detailed surveys, some dating back to the late 19th century, showed a curious anomaly. A faint circular magnetic disturbance in that exact area, too localized to be a general geological feature, yet too subtle to be definitively identified. It had always been dismissed as an error or an unconfirmed reading. But now, with the knowledge of the black column, the ringing stone, and its powerful hum, the magnetic disturbance clicked into place. The column, that obsidian-like monolith, was clearly generating a massive electromagnetic field. It wasn't just ringing, it was radiating energy. This realization was a terrifying epiphany. The church wasn't just a ruin, it was a shell, a container for something far older, far more powerful, buried beneath. The circular depression, the magnetic anomaly, they were all manifestations of this hidden power, radiating outwards. And the faces, the trapped faces, what if they weren't just absorbed by the structure, but were feeding it, or were being consumed by its energy? A chilling new interpretation of the not yet done with me thought began to form. If the entity was sentient, if it radiated this energy, what if my presence, my intrusion, had awakened it further? What if it needed something? What if I was now part of its plan? The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through me, a cold dread that went beyond mere fear of death. It was the fear of being used, of being an unwitting pawn in something ancient and monstrous. I knew I couldn't go back to the marsh alone, not again, not after seeing what lay beneath, but I couldn't abandon it either. The knowledge burned in my mind, a toxic secret. I paced my small motel room, the carpet worn thin by countless transients, the walls seeming to close in on me. I needed help. I needed someone to believe me, someone with the resources and knowledge to investigate this. But who? My mind went to my former mentor, Professor Alastair Finch. He was an eccentric but brilliant archaeologist, specialized in anomalies, unexplained structures, and fringe theories, often to the detriment of his mainstream academic career. He was ridiculed by his peers for his obsession with lost civilizations and esoteric energy fields, but he was also one of the few people I knew who might not immediately dismiss my story as madness. He had an open mind, perhaps too open, and a profound respect for the unknown. The thought of calling him, of revealing this impossible truth, filled me with apprehension. Finch was known for his almost reckless enthusiasm when presented with a genuine anomaly. He might dismiss me, or worse, he might believe me too readily, dragging me deeper into something I no longer wanted any part of. But he was my only option. He was my last hope of bringing any kind of sense, any kind of explanation to this nightmare. I found his old contact information in my phone, an ancient landline number for his cluttered university office and a rarely used email address. I opted for the email first, needing to compose my thoughts carefully to present the information in a way that might pique his interest without sounding entirely unhinged. I spent hours crafting the email, deleting, rewriting, struggling to articulate the impossible without sounding insane. I described the marsh, my survey work, the initial appearance of the bell, and then the discovery of the church. I carefully outlined the architectural anomalies, the strange symbols, the motionless bell. Then, taking a deep breath, I described the face in the wall, the pulsating hum, and finally, the descent into the cavern, the colossal black column, the ringing stone, and the hundreds of trapped faces. I attached the grainy photos, including the GPS data and the superimposed topographical maps showing the circular depression and magnetic anomaly. I reread it several times. It was still outlandish, unbelievable. But the raw data, the photos, they were objective evidence. They spoke a language that Finch, with his unconventional interests, might understand. I hit send. The moment of hitting the send button was both a relief and a plunge into deeper anxiety. I had committed. I had shared the secret. Now the waiting began. The next few days were excruciating. I stayed in the motel, unable to function, unable to focus on anything else. Every time my phone buzzed with an email notification, my heart leaped into my throat, but it was always spam or an automated message. No word from Finch. Doubt began to creep in. Had he dismissed it? Had the email gone to his junk folder? Or had he, too, been swallowed by the absurdity of it? On the fourth day, as I was contemplating giving up, packing my things, and trying to disappear into obscurity, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. It was a landline, a university extension. Finch. I stared at the screen, my hand trembling, a knot of dread and desperate hope tightening in my stomach. I took a deep, shaky breath and answered. Hello. Is this Mr. Elias Vance? A crisp, slightly academic voice inquired. It was unmistakably Professor Finch. His voice was older than I remembered, but still sharp, still precise. Yes, Professor, it's Elias. There was a moment of silence on the other end, a pause that stretched taut with anticipation. Then Finch's voice, now imbued with a barely contained excitement, cut through the quiet. Elias, my boy, what in the blazes have you stumbled upon? The relief that washed over me was profound, so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. He believed me, or at least he was intrigued enough not to dismiss me outright. It's more than I can describe, Professor, I stammered, my voice rough with disuse and emotion. It's impossible. Impossible is a word I've grown quite fond of, Elias, Finch chuckled, a dry, reedy sound. Your photographs, crude as they are, coupled with that topographical data and the old magnetic surveys, they tell a story. A truly astonishing story, if I'm not mistaken. You believe me? Believe is a strong word, Elias. Let us say I am profoundly interested. Fascinated even, this bell, this hum, the faces it borders on the fantastic. But your data, the precision of your work, even under duress, is impeccable. You're not one for flights of fancy, I know that. And the geological anomalies you've pointed out are compelling. I need your help, Professor. I don't know what to do. Naturally, this is well beyond your remit as a surveyor, my boy, and mine as an archaeologist, if I'm being honest. But I have spent a lifetime chasing such shadows. This feels different, weightier, more ancient. His voice grew serious, the underlying excitement now laced with a scholarly gravitas. I've spent the last few days cross-referencing everything you sent me, Elias, and I've found some tenuous connections. My heart pounded. Connections to what? To old legends, Elias, very old. Obscure Amerindian myths dismissed as fanciful tales by mainstream ethnographers. Whispers of singing stones and places of swallowing earth in the deep swamps predating even the earliest colonial settlements. Stories of certain tribes vanishing, leaving no trace near anomalous natural formations. Swallowing earth. Indeed, the legends are vague, but they speak of certain nodes in the wilderness where the veil between worlds thins, where the land itself has a hunger. Places that draw in, that consume. Your circular depression, your magnetic anomaly, the ages-old nature of the church, it aligns, remarkably so, but it's still just folklore, mind you, until now, perhaps. What does it mean, Professor? It means, Elias, Finch said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, that you might have stumbled upon something profoundly significant. Something that could redefine our understanding of history and indeed of reality itself. And something, I suspect, that is immensely dangerous. Dangerous, I felt it. I felt the malice there. I don't doubt it. Power of that magnitude, particularly that which seems to predate human understanding, is rarely benign. Tell me, Elias, have you experienced any lingering effects, beyond the obvious psychological trauma, that is? The question caught me off guard. Lingering effects, what do you mean? Are you sleeping? Do you hear the bell when it's not present? Do you feel watched? My blood ran cold, he knew. Yes, I admitted, my voice barely audible. The bell, the hum, the faces there in my head, and I feel a presence, like it's not finished with me. Precisely, Finch said, a grim satisfaction in his tone. The legends speak of places that leave their mark on those who encounter them. Places that subtly influence, that draw you back. You are still connected, Elias. You are still part of its web, whether you wish to be or not. The words sent a shiver down my spine. This was worse than I thought. What do we do, Professor? We investigate, Elias. We must. This is too important to ignore. We gather more data. We confirm, but we do it carefully, and we do it together. Together, the idea was both terrifying and a profound relief. I wouldn't be alone. Yes, I'll need to make some arrangements here, acquire some specialized equipment. I'll need to be discreet. This isn't something one broadcasts to the university board, you understand. Of course, I said, a wry, grim smile forming on my lips. They'd have you institutionalized. Finch chuckled, a familiar threat, my boy, but this time it might be worth the risk. Listen, I want you to go home. Try to rest. Do not go back to the marsh. Do not try anything foolish. I'll need a few days, perhaps a week, to prepare. I'll meet you. Where exactly are you, Elias? I'm assuming you're not still camped in the marsh. I gave him the name of the motel and my approximate location. He took down the details. Good, stay put. I'll contact you when I'm ready to rendezvous. We'll need a proper plan. We'll need to be equipped. This isn't a simple survey, Elias. This is an expedition into the heart of an ancient enigma. And if these legends are true, it's an enigma that might just be alive. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone, my hand still trembling. Finch believed me. He was coming. The relief was immense, but it was overshadowed by a creeping sense of dread. I was now actively involved, committed. There was no turning back. The decision had been made for me, not by me. I packed my minimal belongings, paid for the motel room, and started the long drive home. The journey was different this time, no longer driven by blind panic but by a grim determination. I still felt the phantom bell, the cold dread, the sense of being watched, but now there was a purpose, a direction. When I finally arrived at my apartment, the familiar space felt alien, too small, too quiet. The city outside, with its constant hum of traffic and distant sirens, felt like a thin veneer over a deeper, more ancient reality that I had now glimpsed. I tried to resume some semblance of normalcy, but it was impossible. My work piled up, ignored. My calls went unanswered. My friends, if they called, were met with curt, distracted responses. I spent hours poring over my photos, my notes, and the scattered, obscure research papers I had downloaded. I tried to mentally reconstruct the layout of the church, the cavern, the column, committing every detail to memory. The nights were still plagued by nightmares, but now they were more vivid, more insistent. I saw the angular figures from the frescoes moving, chanting around the pulsing column. I heard the frantic, desperate toll of the bell, the keening whine of the hum growing louder, more urgent. I saw the faces twisting, their eyes burning with a dark, primal energy, their mouths silently screaming my name. Sleep offered no respite, only a deeper immersion into the horror. I woke each morning drenched in sweat, my body aching, my mind exhausted, but with a new, terrifying certainty. The marsh was calling to me. The entity, whatever it was, knew I had seen it, and it wanted me back. A week later, Professor Finch called again. His voice was subdued, but with an undercurrent of urgency. Elias, I've secured a research grant. It's unorthodox, but it will provide us with the necessary equipment. I've also managed to convince a former colleague, a specialist in archaeoacoustics, to join us. Dr. Eris Thorne. He's a brilliant sound engineer with an interest in ancient resonant frequencies. He might be able to help us decipher that bell and hum of yours. More people? I asked, a fresh wave of anxiety washing over me. Is that wise? This thing, it felt like it shouldn't be disturbed. Perhaps not, Elias, but it has been disturbed by you, and now the knowledge exists outside its confinement. We can't put the genie back in the bottle, my boy. We must understand it, quantify it, if we are to have any hope of containing it, or at least of preventing it from spreading. Spreading, the word struck a chord of ice in my heart. The legends, Elias, they speak of places that grow, that consume. Places where the darkness seeps out slowly, insidiously, affecting the land, the flora, even the minds of those who live nearby. A slow corruption. You are already affected, my boy. And if this entity is truly what I suspect it is, leaving it undisturbed might be the greatest folly of all. Finch's words painted a chilling picture, confirming my worst fears. This wasn't just a local anomaly. This was something with the potential for wider, perhaps global, implications. So what's the plan? I asked, resigned. We meet in 2 days at a small airfield near the edge of the marsh. I'll arrange a bush plane to take us in as close as possible to your original camp. It will save us the arduous trek through the initial miles of the bog. Thorne will meet us there with his gear. We'll set up a temporary base camp a bit further from your original site, a more secure location. And then, Elias, we go back to the church. We go back and we find answers. Answers, I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. I had answers, perhaps too many, and they had shattered my world. Now I was going back for more, knowingly stepping back into the mouth of the abyss. Yes, answers, Finch confirmed, his voice firm, unwavering. And with luck, a way to understand, perhaps even to neutralize whatever impossible horror you've uncovered. Be prepared, Elias. This will be unlike anything you've ever faced. The call ended, leaving me in the silence of my apartment, the hum of the city outside a distant, irrelevant counterpoint to the growing clamor in my mind. I looked at the old, worn topographical map of Blackwood Marsh spread out on my table. My finger traced the invisible, circular depression, the magnetic anomaly, the location of the impossible church. I was going back, with two other men equipped with technology and knowledge, but still just men, against something ancient, sentient, and profoundly malevolent. I felt a cold knot of dread in my stomach, but beneath it a tiny flicker of the old surveyor's drive. The need to map the unknown still stubbornly persisted. This time, however, it was mingled with a primal fear I knew might never leave me. My life, as I knew it, was over. And the next chapter, whatever it held, was about to begin, deep within the dark, unforgiving heart of Blackwood Marsh. The small airfield was less a field and more a strip of cracked asphalt carved out of the wilderness, flanked by dense pine forest on one side and the sprawling, mist-shrouded expanse of Blackwood Marsh on the other. It reeked of stale gasoline and damp earth. I arrived early, my truck feeling heavy with the weight of my apprehension. The morning sun was already warm, but a chill ran through me as I stepped out, scanning the empty tarmac. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant caw of a crow and the gentle rustle of wind through the pines. It was a silence that felt less peaceful and more like a held breath. I paced, my gaze continually drawn to the hazy horizon where the marsh began. It looked deceptively tranquil from here, a vast green-gray blanket stretching into infinity. But I knew what lay hidden beneath that veneer of calm. The phantom bell seemed to thrum faintly in my ears, a distant, internal vibration that had become a constant companion. A small, single-engine bush plane, its fuselage painted a faded yellow, finally buzzed into view, descending from the clear blue sky. It circled once, a graceful, almost incongruous sight against the wild backdrop, before making a surprisingly smooth landing on the rough strip. As it taxied closer, kicking up dust and loose gravel, I could make out two figures in the small cabin. The propeller whirred to a stop, and the door opened with a creak. Professor Finch, looking leaner and a shade more disheveled than I remembered, emerged first. He was a man in his late 60s, with a shock of unruly white hair that seemed to defy gravity, and a pair of spectacles perched precariously on his nose. His eyes, though, were as sharp and bright as a young man's, sparkling with an almost childlike curiosity. He wore practical khaki trousers, a faded flannel shirt, and sturdy hiking boots, looking more adventurer than academic. Behind him, a much younger man unfolded himself from the cramped cockpit. This was Dr. Eris Thorne. He was perhaps in his early 30s, tall and slender, with an air of quiet intensity. His dark hair was neatly cut, his glasses framed an intelligent, somewhat serious face, and he carried himself with an understated confidence. He wore durable outdoor gear, but it seemed newer, more technologically oriented. He immediately began unloading complex-looking equipment cases from the plane's cargo hold, his movements efficient and precise. Finch spotted me, and a wide, eager smile spread across his face. "Elias, my boy, good to see you, though I dare say you look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that, Professor," I replied, forcing a weak smile. I shook his outstretched hand, finding his grip surprisingly firm. "You haven't changed." "Age is merely a suggestion, Elias, not a command," he quipped, his eyes twinkling. He gestured to Thorne. "And this is our esteemed Dr. Thorne. Aris, this is Elias Vance, the man who quite literally mapped the impossible." Thorne straightened up, offering a polite nod and a brief, professional handshake. His grip was cool and firm. A pleasure, Mr. Vance. Professor Finch has given me a fascinating summary of your findings. His tone was calm, measured, revealing little emotion, but there was an undeniable flicker of interest in his eyes. Fascinating is one word for it, I muttered. Indeed, quite the understatement, I imagine, Thorne said, a hint of something I couldn't quite place, perhaps grim amusement, in his voice. The acoustic data you described, a non-physical sound source, a resonant frequency without a discernible origin. It presents quite a challenge to conventional physics. And the faces, Eris, Finch added, his voice dropping slightly. Don't forget the faces. I doubt conventional physics has much to say about them. Thorne paused, then simply said, no, perhaps not. His gaze met mine, and for a moment I felt a flicker of understanding pass between us. He might be a man of science, but he wasn't entirely dismissive of the profound strangeness I had encountered. The next hour was spent transferring their extensive gear from the plane to my truck. It was an impressive array. Custom-built cases filled with what looked like advanced seismic sensors, specialized microphones, EMF detectors, ground-penetrating radar equipment, high-resolution cameras, drones, and a compact, powerful generator. They had come prepared. My own shotgun felt suddenly primitive next to Thorne's gleaming, high-tech instruments. We'll drive as far as this venerable beast will allow us, Finch announced, patting the hood of my truck. Then we hike. I've studied the topographical maps you sent, Elias. We'll set up a more permanent, albeit still concealed, base camp a few miles northwest of your original site. It's on a slightly elevated patch of ground, less prone to flooding, and offers a modicum of cover from aerial observation should anyone be looking. You think someone might be looking? I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. Finch gave me a knowing look. When something this unprecedented appears, Elias, it's prudent to assume that other, perhaps less benevolent, entities might be interested, or already aware. This region has always been notoriously difficult to survey, to map, to properly tame, perhaps for a reason. As we drove the familiar, bumpy dirt track deeper into the wilderness, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of trepidation. The air grew heavier, the vegetation denser, the sounds of civilization fading into an oppressive quiet. I could feel the marsh reaching for me again, its invisible tendrils tugging at my consciousness. The phantom hum in my head seemed to synchronize with the vibration of the truck, making my teeth ache. Finch, seated in the passenger seat, watched the passing landscape with an almost reverent intensity, taking notes in a small, leather-bound journal. Thorne, in the back, meticulously checked his equipment, his expression unreadable. We eventually reached a point where the track became impassable for the truck, dissolving into a muddy, overgrown trail. This is it, I announced, cutting the engine. From here, it's on foot. The silence that descended was immediate and profound, broken only by the chirping of unseen insects. Finch took a deep breath, inhaling the humid air. Ah, the fragrant embrace of the untamed wild, a true scholar's paradise. His enthusiasm was infectious, almost enough to momentarily distract from the underlying dread. Thorne, however, was more pragmatic. He pulled out a specialized tablet, consulting a detailed map. According to Mr. Vance's coordinates, our proposed campsite is approximately 3 kilometers from here, due west. The terrain appears challenging. The understatement of the year, Eris, I murmured, shouldering my pack. It's a bog, a deep, wet bog. For the next 2 hours, we trekked through the dense, unforgiving marsh. The heat was relentless, the humidity suffocating. We waded through thigh-deep water, slogged through thick mud, and battled curtains of Spanish moss and impenetrable thickets of saw palmetto. The mosquitoes, as always, were a persistent, bloodthirsty menace. Finch, despite his age, kept a surprisingly steady pace, his eyes constantly scanning the environment, occasionally pointing out a particularly ancient cypress or a rare orchid. Thorn, silent and efficient, followed my lead, never complaining, his focus entirely on the task at hand. He carried a heavy, specialized backpack that seemed to hum faintly with internal power. As we pushed deeper, the familiar sense of oppressive stillness began to descend. The usual marsh sounds, the chirps, the croaks, the rustles, grew subtly muted, as if the very air was absorbing sound. It was the same unsettling quiet I had experienced near the church, but here, miles away, it was only a whisper, a suggestion. "Do you feel that?" I asked, glancing at Finch. He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "A distinct shift in atmospheric pressure, perhaps, or something more ineffable. The ambient energy here feels different, thicker." Thorn, without a word, pulled out a handheld EMF meter. Its needle flickered erratically, then settled on a reading slightly higher than ambient background levels. "Anomalous electromagnetic fluctuations," he stated calmly. "Subtle but present, they seem to increase as we proceed." His scientific confirmation, though devoid of alarm, somehow made it more unsettling. It wasn't my imagination. The marsh itself was subtly resonating with whatever lay beneath. We finally reached the elevated patch of land Finch had identified. It was a small island of drier earth, overgrown with ancient oaks and thick underbrush, offering a secluded clearing. "Perfect," Finch declared, wiping sweat from his brow. "A natural fortress against prying eyes." Setting up the new base camp was a meticulous process. We erected 2 sturdy camouflaged tents, one for sleeping, one as a command center. Thorn immediately began deploying a network of wireless sensors around the perimeter, seismic, acoustic, and EMF. He set up a small, portable satellite dish for comms and data transmission, powered by their generator. Elias, with his surveyor's eye for precision, helped him calibrate the instruments and establish baseline readings. While we worked, I explained my route to the church in more detail, recounting the erratic GPS data and the general direction. Finch carefully marked it on a large laminated map. "The circular depression you identified, Elias," he mused, tracing a finger across the map. "It's not only magnetically active, but also acoustically distinct, according to our preliminary scans. A natural basin, yes, but one that seems to have a peculiar resonance." "It's like a gigantic drum," I said, remembering the internal ringing of the column. "Or a resonator," Thorn added, without looking up from his work. "A passive amplification system. Fascinating." As dusk settled, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees, the temperature dropped, and a thick, oppressive fog began to roll in from the marsh, shrouding the camp in a ghostly veil. The air grew heavier, colder, and the faint, metallic tang I associated with the church began to permeate the atmosphere, subtle but undeniable. The phantom bell, which had been a low thrum in my mind, now seemed to gain substance. A distant, mournful dong echoing in the fog, just beyond the edge of hearing. I tensed, my hand instinctively reaching for the shotgun. "Do you hear it, Professor?" I whispered. Finch closed his eyes, concentrating. He shook his head. "Not directly, Elias, but I feel a pressure, a low-frequency vibration in the air. Thorn, what are your perimeter sensors picking up?" Thorn was already at the command tent, his fingers flying across the tablet screen. Increased low-frequency acoustic energy, Professor, below the human hearing threshold mostly. But there are intermittent spikes in the audible range coinciding with something. Our seismic sensors are also showing very faint rhythmic vibrations in the ground, too weak to be natural tremors. The bell, I breathed. It's the bell. It's starting again. A subaudible resonance, Elias, but amplified by your specific sensitivity, perhaps, Thorne clarified, his eyes glued to the data. Your previous exposure might have attuned you to its frequency. Finch watched me, a concerned frown creasing his brow. So it's not merely psychological, but a physiological effect of prolonged exposure. Remarkable and concerning. The fog thickened, wrapping around the camp like a shroud, making the familiar outlines of the trees seem spectral and menacing. We ate a silent dinner of dehydrated rations, the quiet broken only by the chirping of Thorne's instruments and the occasional, almost imperceptible low thrum that vibrated through the ground. That night, sleep was fitful. I kept my shotgun close, my senses on high alert. The nightmares were more vivid than ever, the faces in the walls twisting and screaming, the colossal column pulsing with malevolent light. I woke repeatedly, drenched in sweat, convinced I heard the bell, felt the hum just beyond the threshold of conscious hearing. The next morning, the fog persisted, making the marsh a ghostly, alien landscape. Visibility will be limited, Thorne observed, but it might also offer us some concealment. Indeed, Finch agreed, adjusting his spectacles. Today, we make our first official reconnaissance. Elias, you will lead the way to the church. Aris, you'll be deploying a wider array of acoustic sensors, specifically calibrated for that low-frequency resonance. We need to map its precise area of effect. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach, but also a grim resolve. There was no going back now. We packed lighter, each of us carrying essential gear and our own personal defense. I carried my shotgun, Finch a sturdy machete, and Thorne, to my surprise, a compact tactical crossbow with several bolts. Just in case, he said, catching my questioning glance. Some things are best deterred by non-lethal but persuasive force. The trek to the church was even more arduous than my initial journey. The fog made visibility treacherous, reducing the world to a gray, ethereal blur. Each rustle of reeds, each splash in the murky water sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I moved cautiously, relying on instinct and the faint memory of my original path. As we neared the church, the air grew noticeably colder, the silence more profound. Thorne's EMF meter, which he now carried continuously, began to jump erratically. Significant energy fluctuations increasing exponentially, he reported in his calm, scientific drone, though I could detect a subtle tightening in his voice. The field is quite powerful. Then, through the swirling mist, I saw it again, the impossible silhouette, the leaning tower, the gaping maw of its entrance. It loomed out of the fog like a specter, more terrifying in its partial concealment. There it is, I whispered, my voice rough. Finch stared, his jaw slack, his scholarly composure momentarily abandoned. My God, he breathed, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and horror. It's precisely as you described, Elias, a monument to something utterly alien. Thorne, for his part, remained stoic, but I saw his eyes widen behind his glasses, a flicker of genuine shock in their depths. He immediately began setting up specialized parabolic microphones on tripods, aiming them at the church. Aris, begin your acoustic sweeps, Finch ordered, regaining his professional bearing. Elias, lead the way, cautiously. My shotgun was already raised, safety off. I led them towards the ominous structure, wading through the knee-deep water that surrounded it. The bell in the tower was silent, motionless, yet I felt its presence, a heavy, oppressive weight in the air. Inside, the gloom was even more suffocating in the fog. My powerful flashlight cut through the murky light, revealing the waterlogged nave, the fallen beams, the strange, angular frescoes. Finch moved with a kind of reverent horror, his gaze sweeping over every detail, occasionally muttering to himself, taking photographs with a high-resolution camera. The architecture, it's not just pre-Columbian, Elias, he whispered, his voice hushed. It's pre-human. The geometry, the way the stone is cut and integrated, it defies any known terrestrial construction methods. It's almost organic, as if it grew from the earth itself. Thorne, meanwhile, was focused on his instruments. He deployed a specialized hydrophone into the water, its cable snaking back to his tablet. Significant subaudible frequencies emanating from the water, Professor, he reported, his voice tight. The hum you described, Mr. Vance, it's definitely present, and it's resonating with something in the structure itself. The stone, I said, the church itself is humming. Precisely, the entire structure appears to be acting as a giant resonant chamber, amplifying these low-frequency emissions from somewhere deeper. I led them to the alcove where the face was embedded in the wall. My heart hammered against my ribs. I aimed my flashlight, bracing myself. It was still there, pale, waxy, eyes wide and black, staring out of the stone. But this time in the presence of others, and in the stark beam of my new, stronger light, it seemed different, sharper, more detailed. The grime seemed to have receded further, revealing more of the taut skin, the subtle contours of bone beneath. It was undeniably human, or had been, but it was also utterly alien, a fossilized scream embedded in time. Finch gasped a sharp, choked sound. He stared at the face, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and profound fascination. Unbelievable, he whispered. Absolutely unbelievable. A human visage integrated into the stone, the preservation, it defies explanation, and the expression, he shuddered. Thorne approached cautiously, his brow furrowed, his scientific detachment visibly strained. He extended a gloved hand not to touch, but to hold a specialized scanner near the face. Its display flickered with readings I couldn't comprehend. The cellular structure, it's remarkably intact at a molecular level, he said, his voice a low monotone. Yet it shows no signs of active biological function. It's petrified almost, but not by natural geological processes. More like an instantaneous, perfect preservation. A snapshot in time frozen into the stone. A sacrifice, Finch murmured, recovering his voice, or a prisoner, consumed by the very structure it was meant to serve. The weight of their reactions, their undeniable confirmation of the horror, somehow made it more real, more terrifying. I wasn't mad, this was real, and now they saw it too. There's more, I said, my voice barely audible. The source of the bell, it's deeper, beneath the altar. I led them to the collapsed altar, the treacherous path now illuminated by their more powerful lights. The air here was even colder, the metallic tang stronger. I pointed to the heavily overgrown back wall, to the faint, pulsing reddish glow emanating from the symbol of interlocking triangles and circles. The symbol, Finch said, his voice filled with renewed excitement. The same esoteric design, and it's glowing. Aris, can you detect the energy signature of this symbol? Thorn aimed another device, a spectral analyzer, at the carving. The glow is indeed internal, Professor. A form of bioluminescence, perhaps, but with a highly unusual spectral signature, and it's correlated with the low-frequency acoustic emissions. This symbol appears to be radiating energy, both light and sound. And a passage, I added, pointing to the barely visible crack in the stone just above the waterline, almost entirely obscured by moss and debris. That's how I got in. It leads down. Finch and Thorn exchanged a look, their excitement now tinged with a palpable sense of apprehension. Down, Finch repeated, his gaze fixed on the dark opening. Into the very heart of it. Elias, are you sure this is wise? We've barely scratched the surface here. I have to go back, I said, my voice firm. It's the only way to understand. The bell, the hum, the faces, they all come from there, from whatever that column is. Thorn, after a moment of consideration, adjusted his glasses. The data points to this as the epicenter of the anomaly. Logically, further investigation is warranted. However, extreme caution is advised. The energy readings are increasing dramatically in this immediate area. Finch nodded, his gaze hardening with resolve. Very well. Elias, you've seen it once. You lead. Aris, maintain your sensor readings, record everything. We proceed with the utmost care. This is no longer merely an archaeological expedition. This is a descent into the unknown. I took a deep, shuddering breath, my shotgun gripped tightly in my hands. The thought of re-entering that abyssal passage sent a cold spike of dread through me. But the presence of Finch and Thorn, their scientific tools and their shared belief, provided a fragile shield against the overwhelming terror. I squeezed through the narrow opening, pushing aside the thick, clinging vines. The darkness was immediate and absolute, pressing in heavy and cold. The passage sloped downwards, the water rising rapidly, swirling around my waders. The walls were rough, wet, and slick with the same dark, viscous slime. The hum, no longer phantom, was now a visceral vibration, resonating in my chest, making my teeth ache. Finch followed, his movements careful but determined, his flashlight beam cutting a path through the oppressive gloom. Thorn, burdened by his equipment, brought up the rear, his face a mask of intense concentration as he monitored his array of sensors. The walls appear to be carved from a kind of dense, igneous rock, Professor, Thorn reported, his voice echoing eerily in the confined space. But the tool marks, they are unlike anything recorded. Too precise for primitive instruments, yet too crude for modern ones, and the material itself seems to be subtly paramagnetic, attracting the electromagnetic field. The column is affecting the very rock of its containment, Finch murmured, a note of awe in his voice. This is not merely a structure built in a cavern, Elias. It's a structure built into the very fabric of the earth, perhaps shaping it as it was excavated. The passage seemed longer, colder, darker than before. The hum intensified with every step, growing into a deafening roar that filled my skull, blurring my vision. I could feel the cold radiating from the very stone, a primal chill that seemed to seep into my bones. After what felt like an eternity, the passage suddenly opened into the vast, abyssal chamber. My flashlight beam, along with Finch's and Thorn's, swept across the oppressive gloom, revealing the colossal monolithic structure in the center, surrounded by its pool of dark, still water. The column, It stood there, immense and impossibly black, absorbing light, its surface covered in the intricate angular symbols of interlocking triangles and circles, pulsing with that faint, sinister reddish glow. The hum was deafening here, a physical force that vibrated through my entire body, making my bones ache. And the bell. Dung dung dong. The sound emanated from the column itself, deep and sonorous, resonating through the cavern, shaking the very ground beneath us. There was no clapper, no visible mechanism. It was as if the stone was alive, generating its own mournful, relentless toll. Finch stood frozen, his eyes wide, his mouth agape. He raised his camera, but his hands were visibly trembling. By all the ancient gods, he breathed, the words barely audible over the roaring hum. It's impossible. A ringing stone, a living artifact. Thorn, however, moved with purpose. He immediately began deploying specialized sound dampeners and directional microphones, his face grim but focused. He held a small, black device to his ear, listening intently. The frequency signature, it's incredibly complex, he reported, his voice strained. Multiple harmonics superimposed. It's generating a full spectrum of infrasound and ultrasound, not just an audible tone. And the electromagnetic field is immense here, Professor. Off the charts, this thing is a gigantic energy emitter. As Thorn worked, his beam swept across the cavern walls, revealing the hundreds of faces. Dozens, hundreds, embedded in the rock, pale, waxy, eyes wide and black, some screaming, some serene, all terrifyingly still. Finch staggered backwards, almost falling into the water, his eyes fixed on the faces. The faces, he stammered, his voice filled with a profound, visceral horror. They're everywhere, Elias, they're truly everywhere, and they are human. The sacrifices, I whispered, the word tasting like ash, or consumed. Or both, Finch said, a new, terrible realization dawning in his eyes. He slowly reached out a trembling hand towards one of the faces, then pulled it back as if burned. They're not just carvings, Elias, they're incorporated. They're part of the stone, a living wall of the dead. Thorn, having completed his initial setup, turned his attention to the faces. He scanned one with his device. The same molecular preservation as the one above, he confirmed, his voice now devoid of any pretense of scientific detachment, replaced by a genuine note of shock. Each individual appears to be organically bound to the rock matrix. It's as if their very essence has been merged with the stone, but there's residual energy, faint but detectable. Electrical impulses, not unlike brain activity, frozen at the moment of absorption. The concept was unspeakable, not just a mass grave, but a mass absorption. Souls' minds trapped forever, fueling this monstrous machine. The bell's toll seemed to quicken, the hum grew louder, more insistent, pressing in on my skull. The reddish glow from the symbols on the column intensified, casting dancing shadows across the grim faces in the wall. It was almost as if our presence, our collective observation, had truly awakened something or provoked it. It knows we're here, I gasped, stepping back. It's reacting to us. Finch nodded, his face pale. The legend spoke of sentience, Elias, of a consuming hunger. This isn't just a power source. This is a living entity, and it's feeding. Thorn, focused intently on his readings, stiffened. Professor, the energy levels are spiking dramatically, the electromagnetic field is destabilizing, and the acoustic output, it's accelerating. I'm detecting a chaotic resonance forming. Something is happening. Suddenly, the red glow from the column intensified, bathing the entire cavern in a pulsating crimson light. The The symbols on its surface seemed to writhe, shifting and twisting as if alive. The bell's dong became a frantic, overlapping cacophony, a terrifying chorus that vibrated through my very bones. The hum swelled into an unbearable roar, a piercing shriek that clawed at my eardrums. The faces in the walls, bathed in the lurid red light, seemed to twist and contort, their silent screams becoming almost audible in the deafening chaos. Their black eyes, reflecting the crimson glow, seemed to follow us, to burn with a newfound, malevolent awareness. "We need to go," I shouted over the roar, my voice hoarse with terror. "It's too much, it's reacting." Finch, though clearly terrified, seemed transfixed by the escalating horror. "But the data, Elias, we need to understand its output, its patterns." "There won't be any data if it swallows us whole," Thorn yelled, his voice surprisingly loud, snapping him out of his scientific trance. He grabbed Finch's arm. "Professor, we are exceeding safe exposure limits. This field is actively hostile. We need to extract." As if on cue, the very air in the cavern crackled. The water in the pool surrounding the column began to churn violently, boiling and steaming, throwing up dark, phosphorescent spray. A new sound joined the chorus, a low, guttural grinding, as if immense gears were turning deep within the earth. A dark, viscous liquid began to ooze from the walls, dripping over the faces, collecting in grotesque puddles. It glowed with a faint, sickly green phosphorescence. The metallic tang in the air sharpened, becoming overpowering, acrid, like ozone mixed with blood. A wave of pure, unadulterated primal terror washed over me, far stronger than anything I had felt before. This wasn't just an ancient power. This was an awakening, and we were caught in its terrible, hungry gaze. "Run!" I screamed, turning and scrambling back towards the narrow passage, not caring about the treachery of the water, the fallen debris, or my footing. I just needed to escape the suffocating presence of that place, to break free from the monstrous entity that was now fully awake. Finch, propelled by Thorn, stumbled after me, his face pale with terror. Thorn, despite his analytical mind, was also clearly shaken, his scientific instruments now useless in the face of such raw, untamed power. The cavern behind us roared with an escalating frenzy of bell and hum, a palpable physical force pushing us forward. I clawed my way back into the narrow passage, scraping my shoulders, my waders catching on submerged roots and sharp edges of carved rock. The passage seemed longer, colder, darker than before, the walls pressing in on me, threatening to crush me. "Keep moving, don't look back," Thorn shouted, his voice strained, pushing Finch ahead of him. We pushed ourselves upwards towards the faint glimmer of light from the church interior, gasping for breath, our lungs burning. The sounds from the cavern below pursued us, an unrelenting crescendo of bell and hum, a tangible force against our backs, a living roar of ancient hunger. I burst out of the passage, collapsing onto the waterlogged floor of the church nave, coughing and sputtering. Finch followed, then Thorn, who immediately began sealing the entrance with a pre-prepared heavy-duty tarpaulin and several thick ropes using rapid, practiced movements. The muffled dong and insistent hum still filled the church, but the containment of the passage, even if temporary, offered a fraction of respite. "It's actively destabilizing the local reality field," Thorn gasped, wiping sweat from his brow. "The raw energy output is immense. We have to get out of here." We thrashed through the waist-deep water of the nave, scrambling over fallen debris, our minds fixed on the gaping entrance to the marsh. The church felt like a cage, and the sounds within were the roars of the beast, intensifying with every passing second, as if it was tearing at the passage, desperate to follow. We stumbled out into the thick fog of the marsh, gulping in the cold, damp air. The sounds from the church followed, a deep, resonant dong and the insistent hum, but they began to recede almost immediately, swallowed by the dense reeds and cypress trees, muffled by the tarpaulin and the sheer volume of surrounding vegetation. "Move quickly," Finch urged, his voice raspy, surprisingly agile for his age as he pushed through the fog. We plunged into the undergrowth, not caring about the path, just pushing forward away from the impossible horror. My machete swung wildly, clearing a path through the dense vegetation, but my focus was entirely on escape. We stumbled, fell, rose again, driven by pure, unadulterated terror. The phantom bell in my head now seemed to align perfectly with the receding, yet still audible toll from the church. It wasn't just in my mind anymore, it was real. We didn't stop until we burst out onto the drier ground of our makeshift camp, collapsing, chest heaving, lungs burning. I lay there for a long time, eyes closed, listening to the familiar sounds of the marsh, the chirping crickets, the buzzing insects, the distant cry of a hawk. The absence of the bell's deafening toll, the insistent roar of the hum, was a fragile, precious silence. My body was racked with exhaustion, my muscles screaming, but my mind was in overdrive, replaying the images. The colossal black column, the ringing stone, the faces, the oozing slime, the escalating, overwhelming power. It was a nightmare made real, a monstrous secret that had truly awakened beneath the marsh. Finch was sitting up, his hands shaking as he tried to light a small camp stove for coffee. His face was pale, his eyes still wide with shock. "Unbelievable," he kept muttering, "absolutely unbelievable. The raw power, the sheer malevolence." Thorne, however, was already back at the command tent, his fingers flying across his tablet, monitoring the sensor readings. "The energy output from the anomaly is decreasing, but slowly," he reported, his voice still tight. "It's retreating, but it's still highly active, and the localized magnetic field around the church is fluctuating wildly. The containment held for now." "The containment?" I gasped, looking at him. "You think that tarpaulin can contain that thing?" Thorne shook his head grimly. "No, Mr. Vance, it's a temporary dampening measure at best, a signal scrambler. It buys us time. It makes it harder for the entity to project its influence outwards or to destabilize the localized reality, but it will not hold it indefinitely." "So what now?" I asked, my voice hollow. "We can't go back in there, not after that." Finch, having managed to get the stove going, looked up, his gaze meeting mine. The fear was still in his eyes, but it was now tempered by a fierce academic resolve. "No, Elias, we cannot go back in there, not in the same way, not yet, but we have witnessed something truly profound, something that defies all known science, and we have data, crucial data. We need to analyze it, to understand what we have truly encountered." "Understand?" I retorted, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "What is there to understand? It's a living horror, Professor. It's not meant to be understood. It's meant to be avoided." "Perhaps," Finch conceded, "but avoidance is no longer an option, my boy. Not for you, not for me, and certainly not for the wider world if this thing can truly spread. We must learn its nature, its purpose, its weaknesses. We must find a way to neutralize it. We must find a way to survive it." Finch's words hung heavy in the air, a grim pronouncement that settled deep in my bones. Survival, that was the new objective. Not just understanding, not just containment, but a desperate fight for our very existence. The coffee, when he finally offered it, tasted bitter and metallic, a fitting reflection of my mood. Thorn, meanwhile, had immersed himself in the glowing screens of his equipment. He didn't speak, but the intensity of his focus was palpable. His scientific detachment, though momentarily shattered in the cavern, was now slowly reasserting itself, channeling his fear into meticulous analysis. I sat on a fallen log, my shotgun still clutched in my lap, trying to calm the frantic thrumming of my heart. The cold dread remained, a persistent phantom limb of the cavern's terror. I kept seeing the faces, their eyes burning red, their mouths silently screaming. The bell's toll, though no longer physically deafening, echoed relentlessly in the chambers of my mind. "Elias, are you all right, my boy?" Finch asked, his voice softer now, filled with genuine concern. He sat beside me, offering a hand to my trembling shoulder. "No, Professor, I don't think I'll ever be all right again," I admitted, my voice hoarse. That thing, it felt like pure malice, like a living, breathing void. Finch nodded slowly, his gaze distant, lost in thought. Malice, yes, but also intelligence, an ancient, calculating intelligence. It reacted to our presence, Elias, to our probing. It wasn't just a random burst of energy. It was a warning, a territorial display. "Or a feeding frenzy," I countered, remembering the viscous green slime. "Perhaps both," Finch conceded, his face grim. "But the fact it reacted implies a form of consciousness. Not animalistic, but something far, far older. Something that perceives, something that desires, something that knows." Thorn finally spoke, his voice quiet, almost reverent, as he stared at his tablet. "Professor, Mr. Vance, I've managed to run an initial analysis on the raw data. The energy signatures from the column are unlike anything I've ever seen or read about. The electromagnetic field it generates is staggering, capable of disrupting localized gravitational fields, warping light, and even altering the fundamental properties of matter at a quantum level." My eyes widened. Altering matter, is that how the face is? "It would explain the perfect molecular preservation, yes," Thorn confirmed, looking up, his glasses reflecting the screens. "It's not petrification as we understand it, nor mummification. It's more akin to instantaneous active transmutation. The living tissue is transmuted into stone, but somehow retains its internal energy, its essence. Their neural pathways still show incredibly faint, persistent electrical activity, frozen in that moment. A kind of perpetual, agonizing stasis." Finch shuddered, running a hand through his unruly hair. "A living wall of the dead. It uses them not merely as a decorative element, but as a battery, a memory bank, a library of agony." "Perhaps all three," Thorn said, his voice now taking on a more academic, yet still disturbed tone. "The complex resonant frequencies it generates, the bell and the hum, they're not just sound. They appear to be structured, patterned. They're like an immensely powerful, multi-layered signal. My preliminary algorithms suggest it's a form of data transmission, or perhaps, more accurately, a form of conscious communication. But at a scale and complexity beyond human comprehension." "Communication," I repeated, a fresh wave of horror washing over me. "Who or what is it communicating with?" Thorn shook his head. "Unknown. The signal is highly localized to the structure, but it also propagates outwards, weakening significantly over distance. My hypothesis is that the faces in the wall, those assimilated individuals, are acting as receivers and transmitters. They're not just trapped, they're active participants in this process, even in their petrified state. Their consciousness, their very life force, is being exploited." Their screams, their thoughts, their fears, they might be part of the signal itself. The thought was chilling. My own exposure to the hum, the bell, the faces, was I also becoming a receiver? Was that why I still felt its presence, its cold dread? Finch, having absorbed Thorn's explanation, began to pace, his mind clearly racing. The Amerindian legends, Elias, the singing stones, the places of swallowing earth where the veil between worlds thins. It all aligns. This column, it's not just a physical structure, it's a nexus, a conduit, a gate perhaps, or a living supercomputer, processing and transmitting information sourced from the absorbed consciousnesses. And it's feeding, I added, remembering the viscous green ooze. Thorn nodded. That viscous liquid, I managed to get a remote spectrometer reading on it. It's an incredibly complex organic compound, unlike anything in terrestrial biology, highly energetic. It appears to be a waste product, perhaps, or a byproduct of its processing. But the source of its energy input, that's still a mystery. It draws power from somewhere else, from the Earth itself, or from the dimension the legends speak of. The magnetic anomaly, Finch mused. The circular depression. It's a massive energy sink. This column is drawing on something vast, something buried deep beneath the marsh, perhaps even beneath the continental plate. A geological anomaly, or something that created the anomaly. The scale of the horror expanded with every revelation. This wasn't just a strange ruin. It was a foundational element, an ancient, cosmic horror deeply embedded in the very geology of the planet, waiting to be rediscovered, to be awakened. And we, in our foolish curiosity, had done just that. "What about the bell?" I asked, recalling its frantic toll. "What is its purpose?" Thorn consulted his screen again. The audible bell tone is a higher frequency harmonic of the overall signal. It seems to function as an alarm or perhaps a localized deterrent. When the entity feels threatened or when its energy levels spike, it manifests the bell tone more strongly. It's a warning. And for you, Mr. Vance, it may also be acting as a kind of beacon, attracting your attention, drawing you back in. My blood ran cold. The not yet done with me thought was no longer a chilling intuition. It was a scientifically confirmed fact. I was marked. Finch stopped pacing, his eyes fixed on me. Elias, Eris is correct. Your prolonged exposure, your innate sensitivity, you've been attuned to its frequency. It perceives you and it has an interest in you. You are, in a sense, compromised, a potential conduit, a target, or even a future vessel. The last word hit me like a physical blow. A future vessel. Was that what it wanted? To absorb me, to add my consciousness to its agonizing wall of the dead? The thought was unbearable. "So what do we do?" I asked again, desperation creeping into my voice. "We can't just leave it, not now that it's awake, not now that it knows we're here." Finch sighed, a heavy sound that spoke of the immense burden now placed upon us. "No, we cannot. Leaving it would be an act of profound irresponsibility, perhaps even global suicide. If this entity can spread, as the legends suggest, if it can subtly corrupt the land and the minds of those nearby, then we have a duty to contain it, or, at the very least, to understand how to defend ourselves against it." Thorn, ever pragmatic, offered a grim assessment. "Containment would be incredibly difficult, Professor. Its energy output is immense. Any conventional barrier would be instantly dismantled. And short of detonating a tactical nuclear device directly on top of it, which is obviously out of the question, physical destruction seems improbable, given its seemingly non-terrestrial composition and ability to manipulate matter. We're talking about an entity that predates human civilization, possibly even sentient life on Earth," Finch said, his voice quiet. "Its survival mechanisms would be robust, to say the least. We must approach this not as a battle of brute force, but as a battle of intellect. We must learn its language, understand its purpose, and exploit any potential vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities, I scoffed. What vulnerability could a godlike horror have? All things have weaknesses, Elias, Finch said, a spark of his old academic stubbornness returning. Even gods, often their greatest strength is also their greatest vulnerability. Its reliance on absorption, for example. Perhaps it needs specific resonant frequencies to sustain itself. Perhaps its communication network can be disrupted. Perhaps it's vulnerable to specific wavelengths of energy or even specific forms of consciousness. Thorne nodded. My data suggests the entity operates on specific resonant frequencies, yes. The bell and the hum are its vocalizations, its core operating frequencies. If we could generate a counter-frequency, an anti-resonance, we might be able to disrupt its internal processes, like a sonic EMP, but for its specific energy signature. My mind, still reeling from the cavern's horrors, struggled to grasp the sheer audacity of Thorne's idea. You're talking about building a giant tuning fork to disrupt a sentient, ancient monolith. In essence, yes, Thorne replied, completely serious. My current equipment is too limited, of course. We'd need something far more powerful, far more precise. A targeted, high-energy acoustic emitter capable of generating an inverse waveform at its primary resonant frequency. It's a highly theoretical approach, but based on the principles of destructive interference. Finch's eyes lit up with renewed excitement, pushing aside his fear. Brilliant, Eris, absolutely brilliant destructive interference. If we can create a countersignal that negates its own, we might be able to temporarily disable it, or at least disrupt its ability to feed or communicate. It's a long shot, but it's a scientific approach rather than a purely reactive one. And it would require immense power and incredible precision, Thorne cautioned. We'd need to get much closer to measure its exact frequency, and then we'd need to deploy a device of significant size and power within its immediate proximity. It's incredibly dangerous. Danger is our middle name now, Eris, Finch said with a grim smile. But we need more time. Time to analyze this data, time to design and build such a device, and time to gather the necessary resources. This grant I secured, it's a pittance compared to what we'll truly need. This goes beyond academic curiosity. This is a matter of global security, if I'm not mistaken. So we go back to civilization, I asked, a glimmer of hope forming. We tell people. Finch's smile faded. To whom, Elias? The university board, the government, they dismiss us as madmen. Or worse, they'd try to militarize it, contain it with conventional weapons, which Thorne just indicated would be futile and potentially catastrophic. Imagine what would happen if a conventional attack merely irritated it or caused it to accelerate its spread. He paused, then continued, his voice low and serious. No, we cannot reveal this, not yet, not until we have a solid plan and a working prototype of a countermeasure. We have to work in the shadows, Elias. We are the only ones who know, and for now, that knowledge is both our curse and our only strength. The burden of that secret pressed down on me heavier than any rock. We were 3 men, isolated in the heart of a primordial bog, holding the knowledge of an awakening horror that threatened reality itself. So the plan is more research, I asked, feeling a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. Precisely, Finch confirmed. We will remain here for a few more days. Eris needs to continue analyzing the data to refine his understanding of its frequency signatures. Elias, you will continue to assist with the perimeter sensors, monitoring the marsh for any subtle changes, any signs of the entity's influence spreading, and we will all try to survive. The next few days were a blur of intense activity and simmering dread. Thorn, fueled by caffeine and an almost obsessive scientific drive, spent countless hours in the command tent, surrounded by screens filled with complex waveforms, spectral analyses, and electromagnetic fluctuations. He was constructing a theoretical model of the entity's internal mechanics, trying to understand its operating system. Finch, meanwhile, delved deeper into his esoteric texts, cross-referencing Amerindian legends with obscure alchemical treatises, lost Gnostic gospels, and even forgotten geological surveys that spoke of peculiar earth energies. He was searching for any historical precedent, any forgotten knowledge that might offer a clue to the entity's nature or its weaknesses. He kept muttering about telluric currents and ley lines and primordial resonators. My role was more grounded, but no less terrifying. I maintained the perimeter, checked the camouflage sensors Thorn had deployed, and patrolled the immediate vicinity of the camp. The marsh itself seemed different now, subtly altered. The silence was more profound, more watchful. The shadows seemed to lengthen, to twist into suggestive shapes. I swore I could see faint, swirling patterns in the mist, like trapped faces just at the edge of my vision. The hum was now a constant companion, a low thrumming behind my ears, a vibration in my chest. It was no longer just in the church, it was seeping out, a subtle, insidious influence. Thorn's perimeter sensors confirmed it. The low-frequency acoustic energy, though dramatically reduced from the cavern's intensity, was subtly spreading, affecting a wider area of the marsh. The localized magnetic anomaly around the church was still strong, but smaller, secondary fluctuations were beginning to appear further out, faint echoes of the primary field. "It's like a ripple effect," Thorn explained one evening, looking up from his tablet, his eyes bloodshot with fatigue. "The primary entity is still largely contained, but its influence, its resonant field, is slowly propagating outwards. It's subtle, but it's there. The marsh is slowly beginning to hum with its frequency. It's acclimatizing, Elias, or it's preparing." "Preparing for what?" I asked, my voice tight. "To expand, to feed on a larger scale. The local ecosystem, perhaps, or, eventually, the minds of those who stray too close." Thorn's face was grim. "Your sensitivity, Elias, is both a burden and a potential asset. You are an early warning system. You feel its touch before my instruments can definitively quantify it." Sleep offered no escape. My nightmares were now a terrifying descent into the column's inner workings. I saw the angular figures from the frescoes, no longer still but moving with slow, deliberate precision, chanting in a language of clicks and hisses, their eyes glowing with the same crimson light as the column. I was dragged towards the column, forced to witness the faces of countless victims, their screams echoing silently in my mind, their eyes accusing. I saw the column pulsing, not with light, but with raw, malevolent energy, growing, expanding, reaching out. And in the center of it all, a single, gigantic, obsidian eye watching me, knowing me, waiting for me. I would wake drenched in sweat, gasping, my heart pounding, convinced the bell was tolling right outside my tent. The boundaries between reality and nightmare began to blur. One afternoon, as I was checking a distant EMF sensor, I stumbled upon a small group of wild hogs, their eyes glowing faintly red in the gloom, their movements strangely sluggish and uncoordinated. They didn't run from me but merely stared, their snouts twitching, a low, guttural grunting sound emanating from their throats that seemed to resonate with the hum in my own head. A chill ran down my spine. The marsh was indeed changing. I reported it to Finch and Thorn. Thorn immediately dispatched a drone with spectral analysis capabilities. the readings came back disturbing. Subtle bioenergetic alterations, Thorne reported later that evening, his voice strained. Their cellular structures are showing initial signs of the same molecular realignment we saw in the faces, albeit in a very nascent stage. Their brains, their neural activity is erratic, but also shows traces of a synchronized, low-frequency oscillation. It's as if their minds are being tuned to the entity's frequency. The corruption, Finch whispered, his face pale. The legends spoke of it, the land itself being affected, the minds of creatures being twisted. It's beginning, Elias. The entity isn't just dormant anymore, it's active, it's growing, and it's insidious. We discussed our options around the flickering light of the campfire. The situation was escalating, becoming more urgent with each passing day. The marsh was slowly being assimilated, and we were trapped in the middle of it. We need more powerful equipment, Thorne stated, tapping on his tablet. My theoretical model of the counterfrequency generator is robust, but the components required are incredibly specialized and expensive. We're talking about high-energy resonant cavities, phased array emitters, custom-built power converters, things that don't just sit on a shelf. And we'd need a highly stable, high-output power source to drive it. And we'd need to deploy it directly into the cavern, Finch added, his brow furrowed. Which means re-entering that hellish chamber, and the entity is now fully awake and actively hostile. The thought of returning to the cavern, of facing that activated column again, sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. But the alternative, letting this thing spread, letting it consume the world, was even worse. How long do we have? I asked, my voice barely audible. Thorne ran a quick calculation on his tablet. At its current rate of propagation, the entity's sphere of influence will reach the nearest populated areas within a matter of months. Perhaps 6 to 8 months before significant detectable effects begin to manifest in human populations. Physical illness, psychological disturbances, unexplained disappearances, the subtle corruption leading to eventual absorption. 6 to 8 months. It felt like an eternity and no time at all. Finch slammed his hand on the table, a sudden burst of frustration. We need help, but who would believe us, Elias? Who has the resources and the courage to take on a challenge of this magnitude without risking catastrophic overreaction? His eyes suddenly sparkled with a desperate, half-mad idea. There is one, perhaps, one who might believe us, one who has the resources, the network, and the, shall we say, unconventional worldview to grasp the implications of this. A former associate of mine, a patron more accurately, a collector of the esoteric, a man who moves in shadows but whose influence is undeniable. Who? I asked, intrigued despite my exhaustion. A man named Silas Croft, Finch explained, his voice low. He runs a private research foundation ostensibly dedicated to unexplained phenomena. But in truth, he's a deep-pocketed enthusiast of the truly bizarre. He's funded many of my more fringe expeditions in the past. He believes in things that defy explanation. He has access to cutting-edge technology and, more importantly, a network of highly skilled, discreet individuals who are not afraid of the unknown. A private organization, I asked, skeptical, not tied to any government. Precisely. Croft operates entirely independently. He has his own agenda, of course, but it often aligns with the preservation of humanity from unforeseen threats. He's not a philanthropist, Elias, he's a survivalist, and he's utterly ruthless in his pursuit of knowledge and power, but also incredibly effective. Finch gave me a sharp look. He's also incredibly dangerous in his own way. He plays by his own rules, but he might be our only hope. So we contact this Croft, I said, feeling a flicker of something akin to resolve. We tell him everything. Everything, Finch confirmed, a grim determination in his eyes. We present him with our data, our findings, and our analysis. We make him understand the gravity of the situation. He won't dismiss us. He thrives on this kind of impossible mystery, but he will demand proof, and he will demand our complete cooperation. What kind of cooperation? I asked, a premonition of trouble forming. His kind of cooperation, Ilias, Finch said, a wry, grim smile touching his lips. He owns the game once you're in it, but he gets results, and right now, results are all that matter. The decision was made. Finch spent the next day meticulously crafting a highly encrypted communication to Croft, using a secure satellite link Thorn had established. He attached a heavily summarized version of our data, careful to present enough compelling evidence to pique Croft's interest, without revealing the full extent of the horror just yet. We need him to understand the threat without terrifying him into inaction or worse, into trying to exploit the entity for his own ends, Finch explained. Croft is a pragmatic man. He acts when he perceives a direct threat to his interests, or when an opportunity for unprecedented knowledge presents itself. The wait for Croft's response was agonizing, even more so than waiting for Finch. We knew we were sitting on a ticking time bomb, the marsh slowly succumbing to the entity's insidious influence. Every rustle in the reeds, every unexplained sound, every vivid nightmare served as a chilling reminder of the growing danger. Finally, late on the third day, a reply came. A single encrypted message, very brief. Intrigued, coordinates confirmed. Stand by for extraction. Do not deviate. Expect arrival 300 local. Be prepared. He's coming, Finch breathed, a mixture of relief and trepidation on his face. Just like that, no questions, no debate, he simply acts. Extraction, I repeated, a fresh wave of unease washing over me. He's not asking us to meet him somewhere, he's coming for us. That's Croft for you, Finch said with a half shrug. He prefers to control the parameters of the meeting, less chance of unforeseen variables. Thorn, ever vigilant, checked his sensor readings. The entity's influence is noticeably stronger tonight, Professor. The low-frequency hum is more pronounced, and the magnetic fluctuations are more erratic. It's almost as if it senses the impending change, or it's reacting to our discussion about its countermeasure. It's reacting, I confirmed, a shiver running down my spine. It knows. That night the marsh felt alive with a subtle, malevolent energy. The mist seemed to cling thicker, colder, and the air crackled with an almost palpable tension. My nightmares were particularly vivid, focusing on the colossal eye in the heart of the column, which now seemed to be staring directly at me, its gaze burning with ancient, hungry knowledge. I woke several times, convinced I could hear the faint, distant toll of the bell, echoing from the direction of the church. As 3:00 a.m. approached, we packed up our essential gear, leaving the heavier scientific equipment behind for later retrieval. Thorn disabled the perimeter sensors, making our camp disappear from his digital map. We stood in the dark, silent clearing, waiting, our senses on high alert. The only sound was the omnipresent, low hum of the marsh and the distant, unsettling calls of nocturnal creatures. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the silence. Not a plane, but a low, throaty thrum growing steadily louder. It was a helicopter, but not just any helicopter. This was a heavy-duty, military-grade transport, its rotors churning the humid air with immense power. Through the dense fog, a pair of powerful searchlights cut through the gloom, sweeping across the treetops, illuminating our camp in a blinding glare. The roar of the rotors was deafening, making conversation impossible. The mist swirled violently around us, whipped into a frenzy by the downdraft. A sleek black helicopter, its fuselage devoid of any identifying marks, descended slowly, its landing gear barely touching the ground a few yards from our position. The side door hissed open, and a ramp extended, bathed in the helicopter's internal amber light. Two figures, tall and powerfully built, clad in dark, tactical gear, emerged from the helicopter. They moved with a silent, synchronized efficiency that spoke of extensive training. They wore full-face balaclavas obscuring their features and carried compact, specialized firearms. They looked less like bodyguards and more like elite commandos. One of them gestured towards us, a silent, imperious command. Finch, though clearly intimidated, held his ground. Thorn remained impassive, his eyes scanning their equipment. I felt a surge of adrenaline, my hand instinctively tightening on my shotgun. This was not the kind of help I had envisioned. This was an infiltration, a covert operation. Another figure emerged from the helicopter, walking calmly down the ramp. This was Silas Croft. He was a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed even in the wilderness, in a dark, lightweight tactical suit that seemed to flow with his movements. His silver hair was meticulously combed, his face sharp and intelligent, with piercing, cold blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He carried himself with an air of quiet authority, a predatory stillness that was far more intimidating than the armed guards. He stopped a few feet from us, his gaze sweeping over our exhausted, mud-streaked figures, then lingering on my shotgun. His expression was unreadable, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "Professor Finch," he said, his voice a low, cultured baritone, surprisingly calm amidst the roar of the helicopter. "A pleasure, as always, though I dare say your choice of research locations has grown considerably more remote and far more intriguing." Finch straightened his shoulders, attempting to regain some of his academic dignity. "Croft, thank you for coming. The situation is more dire than my initial report indicated." Croft nodded, his gaze now fixed on me. "So I gathered, Mr. Vance, I presume, the surveyor who opened the door, so to speak." His eyes held a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher, curiosity, appraisal, perhaps even a hint of something darker. "Elias Vance, yes," I confirmed, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "And this is Dr. Eris Thorn, our acoustical expert." Thorn offered a curt nod, his gaze still assessing Croft and his heavily armed guards. Croft turned his attention back to Finch. "My preliminary analysis of your data suggests a highly unstable, non-terrestrial energy signature, and your reference to entities of profound malevolence is compelling. Tell me, Professor, is it as ancient as you suspect, as powerful?" Finch swallowed, his voice tight. "More so, Croft. Far more so. It's not merely ancient, it's primordial. It predates any known human history, perhaps even the current geological epoch. And its power, it is capable of altering reality at a fundamental level. It's alive, Croft, and it's awake." Croft's eyes narrowed, a glint of fierce intelligence in their depths. The faint smile touched his lips again, this time with a more distinct predatory edge. "Alive, awake, and you've agitated it. Excellent." My blood ran cold at his reaction. "Excellent," I repeated, incredulous. We barely escaped with our lives, it's consuming the marsh. Croft turned his piercing gaze on me. Indeed, Mr. Vance, and that makes it infinitely more interesting. A truly inert anomaly is a curiosity, an active, volatile, and actively hostile entity that is a rare opportunity. An opportunity to study, to understand, perhaps even to harness. A wave of chilling realization washed over me. Harness, that was Croft's true agenda. He wasn't here to contain it or neutralize it out of altruism. He was here to conquer it, to control it. Finch sensed my unease. Croft, we must be clear, this entity is beyond human comprehension. It's not something that can be controlled. It's too dangerous to even attempt it. Croft merely raised an eyebrow, a dismissive gesture. Danger is merely a metric, Professor, one that can be calculated, mitigated, and ultimately overcome. You've presented me with a puzzle of unprecedented scale, a sentient, primordial power source capable of reality manipulation and operating on frequencies unknown to science. This isn't a threat, gentlemen, it's a breakthrough. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the dark, mist-shrouded marsh, a glint of avarice in his eyes. My organization has spent decades researching anomalous energy fields, esoteric technologies, and the hidden currents that underpin our reality. This is the missing piece, the ultimate prize. Imagine the possibilities, imagine the knowledge, imagine the power. He turned back to us, his voice dropping to a low, commanding tone. Your data, Professor, is invaluable. Your expertise, Mr. Vance, in mapping its localized effects, and yours, Dr. Thorne, in analyzing its resonant frequencies, are now essential to my objectives. You are no longer merely researchers. You are now my assets. You will assist me in understanding this entity, and together we will not merely contain it, we will master it. His words sent a shiver of profound unease through me. We had sought help, and we had found it, but at what cost? We had escaped one monstrous power, only to fall into the hands of another, one that wore a human face and spoke with cold, calculating ambition. There are ethical considerations, Croft, Finch began, his voice surprisingly firm despite his fear. Croft cut him off with a sharp, dismissive wave of his hand. Ethics, Professor, are for historians. Survival and dominance are for the present, and for the future. You have awakened a sleeping giant. Now we shall see if it can be tamed, or, failing that, understood and redirected. He turned to his guards. Secure their remaining equipment. Prepare for immediate departure. We have much to do. The guards moved with silent precision, entering our abandoned camp, quickly gathering Thorne's more sensitive instruments. Get on board, gentlemen, Croft commanded, gesturing towards the waiting helicopter. We have a long flight ahead of us and a great many plans to formulate. I looked at Finch, his face a mask of complex emotions. Fear, resignation, but also a flicker of the academic hunger for knowledge that Croft had so skillfully manipulated. Then I looked at Thorne, whose expression remained unreadable, but whose gaze was intense, analytical, as if already assessing the new, infinitely more complex variables Croft had introduced. My own mind was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Terror of the entity, disgust at Croft's ruthless ambition, but also a dawning realization that there was no longer any escape. We were now fully entangled, pawns in a game far larger and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. I stared at the marsh, its dark, shrouded expanse seeming to pulse faintly with the entity's hidden power. I could still feel the phantom bell, the cold dread, the sense of being watched. But now another presence had joined the equation, a human one, equally formidable and perhaps even more unpredictable. With a heavy heart and a profound sense of foreboding, I climbed the ramp into the helicopter, leaving Blackwood Marsh behind. The door hissed shut, sealing us inside, a tiny metal box flying through the night, carrying 3 terrified, exhausted men and a terrifying secret into the clutches of a man who sought to control the impossible. Our journey was far from over. It had only just begun. The helicopter's interior was stark, utilitarian, and surprisingly spacious. Padded benches lined the walls, and a large, flat screen was embedded in the bulkhead, currently dark. The air was cool and dry, a stark contrast to the humid, oppressive marsh we had just left. The roar of the rotors was a physical presence, vibrating through the floor and up my legs, a dull, insistent thrum that almost masked the phantom bell still echoing in my mind. Croft settled into a seat opposite us, his guards taking positions near the ramp and cockpit. They remained silent, their presence a constant, unsettling reminder of Croft's power. He watched us with those cold, assessing blue eyes, an unreadable expression on his face. Finch sat beside me, his usual academic composure replaced by a tense, nervous energy. He kept glancing at Croft, then at Thorne, then at me, as if trying to gauge our collective reaction. Thorne, as always, remained impassive, his gaze fixed on the blank screen, perhaps already mentally dissecting its potential functions. My own hands were still clenched around the shotgun, a small comfort in this new, terrifying reality. "Comfortable, gentlemen?" Croft asked, his voice calm, cutting through the helicopter's roar with surprising clarity. He didn't wait for an answer. "Professor Finch has provided me with tantalizing, if incomplete, data. I trust you both, Mr. Vance and Dr. Thorne, are prepared to fill in the gaps." "We've presented everything we have, Croft," Finch said, his voice a little strained. "The raw sensor readings, the spectral analysis, our hypotheses." "Hypotheses are merely starting points, Professor," Croft replied, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "Ideal and definitive understanding and control, what you have encountered is not merely an anomaly. It is, if your assessments are correct, a primordial intelligence. Such things are not merely contained. They are either assimilated or they assimilate us." My stomach churned. "Assimilated," I repeated, the word tasting like ash. "You mean like the faces?" Croft's gaze sharpened on me. "Ah, yes, the faces. A fascinating mechanism. Molecular realignment, cellular preservation, neural activity frozen in an active state. Dr. Thorne's initial analysis was remarkably insightful for field conditions. Tell me, Dr. Thorne, what more can you deduce about this process?" Thorne finally spoke, his voice measured, devoid of emotion. "The entity appears to convert organic matter into a mineral matrix while retaining bioelectrical impulses. It's an active transformation, not a passive petrification. The sustained neural activity suggests a form of consciousness, or at least a residual energy is being stored, perhaps harvested. The resonance patterns are key." "Harvested," Croft mused, his eyes gleaming. "Indeed, a bioelectrical battery, a living library, or both. The implications are staggering." And Mr. Vance, he turned his attention back to me, his gaze unnervingly intense, "your unique sensitivity to its influence. You experienced the bell and the hum long before Professor Finch or Dr. Thorne quantified them. You are, shall we say, a receptor, an attuned instrument, a bridge." The word made me recoil. A bridge to what? To the horror, to my own absorption. "My sensitivity is a curse, not an asset," I retorted, my voice firm despite the underlying tremor. Croft chuckled, a low, dry sound. "All curses can be repurposed, Mr. Vance. Your unique connection to the entity's frequencies will be invaluable. You are our early warning system, our diagnostic tool, and perhaps our conduit for more precise measurements." My blood ran cold. He wanted to use me, to push me closer to the edge of that abyss. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not going back in there, not into that cavern." "A sentiment I fully understand, Mr. Vance," Croft said, his tone still calm but with an underlying steel that brooked no argument. "However, our current situation dictates otherwise. The entity is awake, its influence is spreading. We are no longer merely observers, we are now participants. And your participation, as the individual most deeply affected, is non-negotiable." He leaned forward, his piercing blue eyes fixed on mine. "You discovered it. You opened the door. You are now inextricably linked to its fate, and by extension to the fate of this world. Do you truly believe you have the luxury of choice?" The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the helicopter's rhythmic thrum. He was right. We were trapped by the entity, and now trapped by Croft. The flight continued for what felt like hours. I watched the blurred landscape beneath us, the endless expanse of the marsh gradually giving way to more settled, cultivated lands, then to the glittering lights of scattered towns. The sheer speed of Croft's response, the military precision of his operation, underscored the vastness of his resources. This was no ordinary private foundation. This was an organization operating on a global scale, utterly independent, utterly ruthless. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in hues of soft pink and orange, the helicopter began its descent. We weren't landing in a city or even a typical airfield. Beneath us, carved into a remote, mountainous region, was a colossal, camouflaged complex. It was a marvel of covert engineering, hidden from the world by advanced stealth technology and sheer remoteness. Runways disappeared into the side of the mountain, and immense, fortified bunkers blended seamlessly with the natural rock formations. The helicopter settled onto a helipad recessed into the mountain itself, surrounded by blast doors that slid open as we approached. As the rotors spun down, the silence that followed was profound, almost deafening after hours of continuous noise. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and rock. The ramp lowered and we stepped out into a vast, brightly lit hangar. It was a hive of activity. Technicians in specialized jumpsuits moved with purpose between sleek, advanced aircraft. Armored vehicles were parked in neat rows. Scientists, their faces intent, huddled around glowing screens. Everything here was state-of-the-art, meticulously organized, and utterly dedicated to something. Croft led us through a maze of corridors, his two guards maintaining a silent, watchful perimeter around us. The walls were reinforced concrete, the lighting bright but not harsh. Security checkpoints were frequent, manned by individuals whose quiet efficiency spoke volumes about their training. This was a fortress dedicated to secrets. "Welcome, gentlemen," Croft said, his voice echoing slightly in the sterile environment, "to the Croft Foundation's primary research and development facility, designated the Citadel. Here, we analyze the impossible and prepare for the inevitable." We were escorted to a large, circular chamber, clearly a briefing room. A massive holographic projector dominated the center of the room, currently displaying a detailed, three-dimensional topographical map of Blackwood Marsh, with the church and the magnetic anomaly highlighted. Around a large, polished table, several individuals were already seated, their expressions serious. They were a diverse group, A stern-faced woman in a military uniform, a young man with a wild shock of red hair and intense eyes hunched over a laptop, and an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a deeply furrowed brow. "These are some of my key personnel," Croft announced, sweeping his hand towards them. "Colonel Anya Sharma, head of tactical operations. Dr. Jayan Lee, my chief xenobiologist and expert in anomalous energy propagation. And Dr. Alastair Reed, my lead theoretical physicist and expert in quantum mechanics." Each of them nodded curtly, their gazes assessing, analytical. Sharma's eyes, in particular, were sharp and unwavering, missing nothing. "Gentlemen, please take a seat," Croft instructed, indicating 3 empty chairs. "Now, Professor Finch, Dr. Thorne, Mr. Vance, you have their full attention. I want a complete, unvarnished account of your discovery. From the moment Mr. Vance first reported the anomaly to your recent extraction, spare no detail." Finch, recovering some of his academic authority in the formal setting, began to speak, detailing the initial discovery, the historical context, and the escalating strange occurrences. Thorne followed with a meticulous breakdown of his sensor readings, the acoustic phenomena, the electromagnetic field, and the disturbing molecular transformations he observed. They presented their data with an undeniable scientific rigor, translating the raw horror into quantifiable facts. As they spoke, Dr. Reed occasionally interjected with sharp, insightful questions about the entity's presumed energy source and its interaction with fundamental physics. Dr. Lee, meanwhile, was fascinated by the bioenergetic aspects, the mechanism of absorption, and the entity's potential life cycle. Colonel Sharma remained silent, her expression unreadable, occasionally making notes on a data pad. My turn came. I described my experiences, the growing dread, the nightmares, the physical effects of the hum and the bell, and the terrifying, escalating malevolence of the awakening entity. I spoke of the faces, the oozing slime, the boiling water, and the overwhelming sense of being watched, judged, and consumed. The holographic map of the marsh began to augment with visual representations of our data, pulsating red zones around the church representing energy spikes, swirling green patterns indicating the spread of the entity's influence, and abstract waveforms charting the complex acoustic signature. It made the horror visually manifest, undeniable. When I finished, the room was silent. The specialists exchanged grim glances. A sentient, primordial entity, Dr. Reed finally murmured, adjusting his glasses. Capable of local reality distortion, matter transmutation, and conscious communication through resonant frequencies, drawing on an unknown power source, and now actively hostile and expanding its influence. He sounded less horrified and more intellectually invigorated. And it's feeding, Dr. Lee added, her eyes wide. The viscous organic compound, the assimilation of local fauna. It's an apex predator of a different order entirely. Colonel Sharma finally spoke, her voice crisp and authoritative. What are its tactical vulnerabilities, if any? What are its observed limitations? Finch looked at Thorne. We theorized about destructive interference, Colonel, Thorne explained. If we can generate a counter-frequency, an inverse waveform, we might be able to temporarily disable its internal processes. But it requires immense power and extreme precision deployed directly into its core chamber. And the entity itself seems to be anchored to a specific geological anomaly, Finch added. Perhaps it cannot physically move from its nexus point. Its spread appears to be limited to energetic and psychological influence, not physical locomotion. Croft, who had been listening intently, now addressed the room. Excellent. This confirms much of what my own historical analysis has suggested about similar nexus events throughout geological history. Dormant powers occasionally awakened, always devastating, but never before have we had such detailed, real-time data. He pressed a button on the table. The holographic projection shifted, now displaying a schematic of Thorne's theoretical counterfrequency generator, augmented with Croft Foundation designs. Dr. Thorne, Croft continued, your theoretical model is sound. We have the resources here at the Citadel to not only build this device, but to enhance it significantly. Dr. Reed and his team will be working with you, refining the energy emitters, ensuring precise frequency modulation, and designing a robust power supply. We will need to design a deployment platform capable of withstanding extreme localized energy fields. Thorne nodded, his eyes already gleaming with scientific focus. The challenge will be to get accurate, up-to-the-second readings of the entity's resonant frequencies from within its active field. My existing field equipment was overwhelmed. That, Dr. Thorne, is where Mr. Vance will prove invaluable, Croft said, turning his cold gaze back to me. His unique bioreceptor capabilities will allow us to calibrate and fine-tune our remote sensing equipment. We will outfit him with a specialized suit, integrated with highly sensitive biomonitors and frequency detectors. He will be our scout, our ears inside the entity's immediate sphere of influence, relaying critical data to the deployment team. My heart hammered against my ribs. You want me to go back in there, alone? Not alone, Mr. Vance, Croft clarified, his voice smooth as silk. Colonel Sharma will lead a highly trained tactical team. They will secure the perimeter, ensure your safety, and assist with the deployment of the countermeasure device. But you, with your attunement, will be the critical component for pinpointing the exact frequency signature needed for effective destructive interference. Colonel Sharma finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. Mr. Vance will be equipped with the latest environmental suits, sensory feedback systems, and a direct comm link. He will be protected to the extent possible given the unknown variables, but his direct input will be essential for the success of this mission. I looked at Finch, who avoided my gaze, lost in thought. He had led me to this. He had made me a part of this. And now I was being volunteered for a suicide mission. And if it goes wrong, I asked, my voice tight, if I get absorbed or if the counterfrequency fails. Croft's expression remained utterly devoid of emotion. Then we learn from the failure, Mr. Vance, and we adapt. The pursuit of knowledge and the ultimate mastery of such phenomena often comes at a cost. Your potential sacrifice would not be in vain. His callousness sent a fresh wave of disgust through me. This wasn't about saving humanity for Croft. It was about scientific conquest, about power. I need time to process this, I said, rising from my seat. Croft nodded. Of course, you will be provided with private quarters, full access to our medical facilities, and anything else you require. Colonel Sharma will arrange for your gear and training. You have a week, Mr. Vance, 1 week to prepare. Dr. Thorne and Dr. Reed will need at least that much time to finalize the counterfrequency generator. Professor Finch, you will assist Dr. Lee in cataloging and analyzing all known historical records of similar phenomena, searching for any additional insights into its nature or vulnerabilities. We work on a strict timeline now. With that, the briefing ended. We were dismissed. My fate, it seemed, was sealed. The next few days were a blur of intense preparation and a constant struggle against a rising tide of anxiety. My private quarters were luxurious but felt like a gilded cage. I underwent extensive medical examinations, full psychological evaluations, and rigorous physical training. Croft's people were thorough, efficient, and unnervingly polite. A specialized suit was tailored for me, a sleek dark gray environmental suit made of advanced synthetic materials, reinforced with hardened plates. It was equipped with an internal atmospheric regulator, biomonitors that tracked every vital sign, and most importantly, an array of miniaturized frequency sensors designed to precisely measure the entity's output. A helmet with an integrated heads-up display and secure comlink completed the ensemble. It felt like a second skin, a heavy, technological shell that was meant to protect me, but also served to make me feel utterly exposed, a guinea pig for an impossible task. Colonel Sharma personally oversaw my training. She was a woman of steely resolve and impressive competence. Her team of operatives, all equally skilled and silent, ran through simulated deployments, tactical extractions, and emergency protocols. They were experts in navigating hazardous environments, and their movements were fluid, precise. Despite my initial resentment, I found myself respecting their professionalism. They were not malicious, simply dedicated to their mission, whatever Croft's ultimate agenda. Sharma emphasized the need for extreme caution. The entity's effects are largely unknown within its primary field, Mr. Vance. Your suit offers some protection against the energy fields, but its effect on the human mind is another matter. We'll have you on a constant sedative drip to counteract potential psychological disruption, but your unique sensitivity means you will still be exposed to its influence. The sedative, a mild tranquilizer, was a constant companion, a dulling agent against the ever-present hum in my head. It helped with the nightmares, blurring their edges, making them less vivid, but the underlying dread remained. I spent hours with Dr. Thorne and Dr. Reed learning about the counter-frequency generator. It was a marvel of miniaturized engineering, a cylindrical device about the size of a large suitcase covered in intricate emitters and sensor arrays. It was designed to be deployed directly into the cavern's central pool, beneath the column itself, if possible. The precision is everything, Mr. Vance, Dr. Reed explained, his eyes burning with intellectual fervor. We need to pinpoint the primary resonant frequency, the very voice of the entity, to within a nanohertz. Your suit's sensors, directly integrated with your biorhythms, will provide us with the most accurate real-time data from within the field itself. Dr. Lee and Professor Finch, meanwhile, pored over ancient texts in Croft's vast archives. Finch, though still troubled by Croft's ultimate ambitions, was captivated by the new data. He discovered obscure references to world engines and dreamweavers in long-lost cultures, entities that fed on consciousness and resonated with the very fabric of reality. The entity isn't merely consuming individuals, Elias, Finch explained one evening, his eyes wide as he showed me a digital scan of a crumbling scroll. It's harvesting experience. It's a sentient data processor, perhaps using these consciousnesses to build a vast, interconnected network. The faces, they're not just batteries, they're nodes. A global consciousness, I whispered, a chill running down my spine. Perhaps, or something far grander, Finch mused. A cosmic intelligence seeding these nodes across civilizations, across worlds, slowly building a vast, distributed network of absorbed consciousness, processing all of reality. And our Marsh entity is just one small part of a much larger, unimaginably ancient design. The thought was terrifying. We weren't just dealing with a local horror. We were facing a fragment of something truly cosmic. As the week drew to a close, the counter-frequency generator was complete. It hummed with contained power, its surface radiating a faint, almost imperceptible blue light. Dr. Thorne was confident in its design, but the deployment remained the most critical and dangerous phase. On the eve of the mission, Croft called us all for a final briefing. The holographic map of Blackwood Marsh glowed ominously in the center of the room. The entity's influence in the marsh has noticeably expanded in the last week, Croft stated, his voice calm. Dr. Thorne's remote sensors indicate a 15% increase in the localized magnetic anomaly and a subtle but measurable uptick in low-frequency acoustic propagation. The animal corruption is more widespread. It is growing stronger, gentlemen. Time is of the essence. He outlined the plan. Colonel Sharma's team, designated Team Citadel Alpha, will deploy by stealth helicopter to a secure LZ approximately 2 kilometers from the church. They will approach on foot, maintaining full stealth protocols. Mr. Vance, you will accompany them, acting as the primary sensor operator. Once the team secures the church interior, Dr. Thorne and Dr. Reed, along with their engineering support team, will move in with the counter-frequency generator, designated Project Chimera. Mr. Vance will then enter the sub-cavern, using his suit's advanced sensors to obtain the precise real-time frequency data. This data will be relayed directly to Dr. Thorne and Dr. Reed, who will fine-tune Project Chimera. Once locked onto the entity's primary frequency, Project Chimera will be deployed into the central pool. Colonel Sharma's team will then effect a rapid extraction. He looked around the table, his eyes lingering on each of us. This is a high-risk, high-reward mission. The entity is awake, aware, and now undoubtedly prepared. We cannot underestimate it. But with Project Chimera, we have, for the first time, a weapon, a tool to fight back. We will not merely contain it, we will strike at its very core. My stomach churned, a mixture of fear and grim determination. There was no going back now. We departed under the cover of a moonless night, the same sleek black helicopter ferrying us silently towards the marsh. Sharma's tactical team, a squad of 6 silent, heavily armed operatives, moved with ghost-like efficiency. I was sandwiched between 2 of them, my specialized suit feeling heavy and constricting. The familiar damp air of Blackwood Marsh hit me the moment the helicopter ramp lowered. The low hum was immediately present, a subtle vibration in the air, a familiar thrum behind my ears. It was stronger than it had been when we left, more pervasive. The marsh felt colder, more watchful. Sensors nominal, Mr. Vance. Colonel Sharma's voice crackled in my comms. Affirmative, Colonel. The hum is stronger, getting initial low-frequency readings. My helmet, S-HUD, displayed complex waveforms and spectral graphs, already reacting to the entity's presence. We moved through the dense cypress and reeds, the tactical team forming a tight, protective formation around me. Their night vision goggles cast the world in an eerie green glow. Every rustle, every splash was magnified by the suit's sensitive microphones. The marsh was silent but for the hum and the distant, unsettling calls of unseen creatures. As we neared the church, the hum intensified, growing from a background thrum to a distinct, physical vibration in my chest. My suit's internal sensors flashed amber, indicating a localized increase in electromagnetic and acoustic energy. Approaching target 200 meters, Sharma whispered. Maintaining stealth, Vance, report on entity's projected influence. The energy field is intensifying rapidly, Colonel. Readings are spiking. It knows we're here. My voice was tight. The phantom bell for a moment seemed to ring faintly in my mind, a distant, ominous toll. We reached the church, its dilapidated structure looming out of the mist like a skeleton. The tarpaulin Thorn had used to seal the entrance to the sub-cavern was still there, but it looked frayed, torn in places, as if something had been trying to get out. The air around the church crackled with an almost palpable energy. A perimeter secure, Sharma reported. No visible hostiles proceeding with entry. The two of her operatives efficiently cut through the remaining ropes and pulled back the tarpaulin, revealing the dark, abyssal passage. A blast of cold, metallic-smelling air wafted out, carrying with it the undeniable, terrifying resonance of the bell. Dung, dung, dung. It was no longer phantom. It was real, booming from the depths below, a deep, mournful toll that vibrated through the very stones of the church. The hum was deafening here, a physical force that pressed in on my suit. Thorn, Reed, are you receiving my readings? I gasped into the comms, my voice shaking. Loud and clear, Mr. Vance, Thorn's calm voice replied. Readings are off the charts. Extreme acoustic energy, immense EMF. We're getting interference. But your suit's internal dampeners are holding. You're our eyes and ears. Colonel Sharma placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. We're right behind you, Vance. Tactical team will deploy secondary light sources. Focus on your readings. Get us that frequency. I took a deep breath, the filtered air of my suit tasting metallic and sterile. With a grim resolve, I pushed through the passage, scraping against the wet, viscous walls. The helmet's powerful beam cut through the absolute darkness, revealing the treacherous, waterlogged path. The bell's toll grew louder with every step, the hum intensifying into a brain-splitting roar. My suit's HUD was a riot of information, rapidly oscillating waveforms, energy flux indicators, spectral density analyses. I was a walking sensor array, sending a constant stream of data back to Thorn and Reed at the temporary command post they had established a safe distance from the church. The passage seemed longer, colder, darker than ever before. The sedative kept the rising panic at bay, but the sheer force of the entity's presence was overwhelming. It was a tangible entity, a living, breathing malevolence that seemed to press in on my very consciousness. Then the passage opened. The cavern. My helmet's beam, augmented by the powerful tactical lights of Sharma's team, swept across the colossal monolithic column. It stood there, immense and impossibly black, absorbing light, its surface covered in the intricate, angular symbols of interlocking triangles and circles. Now, however, the symbols glowed with a frantic, pulsating crimson light, casting dancing shadows across the grim faces in the walls. The bell was deafening, a continuous, overlapping cacophony of deep, resonant tolls that shook the very ground beneath me. The hum was a piercing shriek, a physical force that vibrated through my bones, making my teeth ache. The faces, hundreds, thousands of them, embedded in the rock, pale, waxy, eyes wide and black. And now they seemed to twist and contort, their silent screams becoming almost audible in the overwhelming chaos. Their eyes, reflecting the crimson glow of the column, seemed to follow me, burning with a renewed, malevolent awareness. Readings, give me readings. Thorn's voice was strained but urgent. Mr. Vance, we need the core resonant frequency, spectral analysis now. I tried to focus, my eyes darting between the column and my HUD. My suit's sensors were struggling, overwhelmed by the sheer power of the entity. The numbers flickered wildly, the waveforms spiked erratically. "It's too much," I screamed, my voice barely audible even to myself within the suit. "The field is too chaotic, I can't get a stable read." Suddenly, the water in the central pool began to churn violently, boiling and steaming. Dark, viscous liquid oozed from the column itself, glowing with that sickening green phosphorescence. A low, guttural grinding sound emanated from deep within the column, as if immense gears were turning, as if it was drawing in something vast, something ancient. "Vance status," Sharma's voice was sharp. Her team had spread out, weapons raised, their lights illuminating the horrifying tableau. It's reacting directly to our presence," I stammered, feeling a surge of pure, unadulterated primal terror. "It's aware, it's escalating." Suddenly, a new, horrifying sound joined the cacophony. A piercing, high-pitched wail echoing from the faces in the walls. It wasn't a human sound, but a multi-tonal shriek, a chorus of agony and rage that seemed to burrow directly into my skull. The sedative was fighting a losing battle. My mind felt like it was tearing apart. "The faces," I gasped. They're screaming." "Vance, maintain focus," Thorne shouted, his voice cutting through the growing internal static. "We need the primary frequency, the bell tone, the hum, we need the bass line." I struggled, forcing myself to look at the HUD. The high-pitched wail was creating destructive interference with my sensors. It was trying to jam my equipment, to overwhelm my senses. This wasn't just a random burst of energy, it was a targeted, intelligent response. "It's trying to stop me," I yelled, my voice hoarse. "It's jamming the sensors, it knows what we're trying to do." Suddenly, a section of the column directly facing me began to glow with an even more intense, blinding crimson light. The angular symbols on its surface writhed and twisted, forming a single, gigantic obsidian eye, just as in my nightmares, and it was staring directly at me. A wave of pure, mind-shattering malice washed over me, a mental assault that transcended all physical sensation. It was a conscious, ancient hatred, vast and terrible, aimed directly at my very soul. The entity was not merely awake, it was enraged. "Vance, report." Sharma's voice was frantic now. My head pounded, the bell, the hum, the screams, the psychic assault. It was too much. I felt a cracking sensation, a splitting in my mind. The sedative was failing. I can't," I choked out. It's in my head." Just then, Dr. Thorne's voice cut through the chaos, cold and precise. "Mr. Vance, disregard the high-frequency interference. Filter for the lowest, most consistent baseline resonance. Your suit has a bypass for raw biofeedback. Focus on feeling the hum. What is its fundamental thrum? Ignore the noise." His words were a lifeline, feeling the hum, my unique curse. I closed my eyes, forcing out the visual chaos, the screaming faces, the malevolent eye. I pushed through the mental static, reaching for the deepest, most foundational vibration emanating from the column. I let my attuned sensitivity take over, overriding the malfunctioning sensors, bypassing the entity's jamming. It was a low, resonant thrum, a vibration that resonated with the very core of my being. It was the primordial heart of the bell, the true voice of the entity. It was cold, vast, and utterly alien, but it was there. Got it, I yelled, opening my eyes. I have a baseline filtering for core resonance, transmitting raw biofeedback data now. My suit's HUD, though still flickering, displayed a single dominant waveform, oscillating with terrifying precision. It was the entity's true signature. Confirmed, Thorne's voice crackled, now filled with urgent excitement. Received, Dr. Reed, synchronize Project Chimera, lock onto Mr. Vance's raw biofeedback signal, deploy. Colonel Sharma immediately ordered her team. Move in, secure the deployment zone, cover Mr. Vance. The two operatives, moving with practiced agility, carried Project Chimera forward. It was encased in a heavy-duty, submersible shell. They plunged it into the churning, phosphorescent water of the central pool, directly at the base of the column. The moment the device touched the water, the column reacted violently. The crimson light intensified to a blinding flare, throwing grotesque shadows that danced like tormented spirits. The bell's toll became a single, continuous, deafening roar, a sound that threatened to shatter my very eardrums. The high-pitched wails of the faces reached a fever pitch, a chorus of pure, unadulterated anguish. The colossal obsidian eye on the column pulsed, its malevolence now focused with terrifying precision on Project Chimera. Dark tendrils of what looked like solidified shadow, writhing and grasping, began to emerge from the column, reaching for the device. Activating Project Chimera, Thorne's voice boomed, initiating destructive interference sequence. A low, resonant hum, unlike any other, emanated from the device in the water. It was a perfect inverse of the entity's primary frequency, a silent scream designed to cancel out its very being. For a moment, nothing happened. The entity's roar continued, its eye burned with furious light, its shadow tendrils thrashed. Then a subtle shift. The deafening bell tone faltered, a momentary break in its incessant toll. The high-pitched wails of the faces seemed to weaken, as if their power was being drained. The crimson glow of the column dimmed slightly, flickering. The shadow tendrils recoiled as if burned, retracting back into the column with a guttural shriek that seemed to echo from deep within the earth. The churning water in the pool began to calm, the viscous green slime receding. The malevolent eye on the column pulsed, its gaze still fixed on me, but now with something akin to confusion, perhaps even pain. It was recoiling. "It's working," Dr. Reed shouted, his voice filled with triumph. The inverse waveform is disrupting its energy matrix. We're causing internal resonance cascade. The column trembled, a deep, shuddering vibration that seemed to shake the entire cavern. Cracks, previously unseen, began to snake across its surface, glowing with a faint, internal blue light that pulsed in opposition to the fading crimson. The sounds from the column began to break apart, devolving into a fragmented, broken symphony of distorted hums and stuttering tolls. The faces in the walls, bathed in the now flickering light, seemed to relax, their contorted expressions softening slightly, their eyes dimming. The wails subsided into a low, mournful sigh, a collective exhalation of suffering. "It's destabilizing," Thorne yelled, a note of awe in his voice. "Its core frequencies are collapsing, it's going dormant." "Extraction," Colonel Sharma's voice snapped, cutting through the fading chaos. "Team Alpha, retrieve Project Chimera, get Vance out of there now." The two operatives moved quickly, grappling for the device in the water. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a profound sense of relief washing over me. We had done it. We had actually heard it. But just as the operatives reached for Project Chimera, a new, unforeseen event occurred. The column, still shuddering, suddenly began to pulse with a faint internal white light emanating from the new cracks. It was a cold, pure light, starkly different from the malevolent crimson, and from those cracks a new sound emerged. Not the bell, not the hum, not the screams, but a low, resonant, multitonal chant. It was a sound of immense power, a vocalization that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my mind. It was a language, vast and ancient, a chorus of countless voices speaking in perfect, terrifying unison, and I understood it. We see, we remember, we awaken, through you we will rise. The multitonal chant resonated directly in my mind, bypassing my ears, a torrent of ancient thought forms flooding my consciousness. It wasn't a language of spoken words, but of pure intent, an overwhelming influx of alien memories and sensations. The source wasn't the column alone, but the millions of absorbed minds within it, a chorus of eternity, all speaking as one. As we see, we remember, we awaken, through you we will rise, we are all, we are one, we are eternal, through you, the gate opens. My mind reeled under the assault. It wasn't just a message, it was an invasion. Memories that weren't mine, feelings of vast, unfathomable loneliness, and then a terrifying, all-encompassing hunger, a desire to absorb, to integrate, to become. I saw glimpses of other worlds, other stars, entire civilizations consumed and added to this cosmic network. The entity wasn't merely alive, it was an aggregate consciousness, a living galaxy of absorbed souls, and it saw me as its next crucial step. My unique sensitivity, my attunement, was a key, and it was forcing the lock. The internal white light in the column pulsed, mirroring the chant, growing brighter, threatening to eclipse the tactical lights. The energy reading on my HUD spiked wildly, exceeding all previous parameters. The cold purity of the light